Hello guys, welcome to Phoenix What If. So in this video, we will see, what if Naruto became captain of Squad 13 and fell in love with Rukia Kuchiki? If you enjoy these kinds of stories, don't forget to show us some love by hitting the like button and subscribing to the channel. Your support means the world to us. Now, let's start the story. Chapter 1. The Son of the 13th Court. The air in the 13th Division's main training yard tasted of dust, sweat, and the sharp, clean scent of ozone that always lingered after a clash of immense spiritual pressure. It was a familiar cocktail, one that the division had grown accustomed to in the year since their new captain had arrived. Today, however, the ozone was thick enough to chew on. Two figures blurred across the hard-packed earth, their movements too swift for the unseated officers ringing the yard to follow. One was a mountain of a man, his bald head gleaming with perspiration, his fists wrapped in white bandages. The other was slighter, a woman with short, spiky black hair, her lithe form a study in focused aggression. Both moved with the practiced grace of seasoned warriors, their haku-da strikes cracking against each other's guards like thunder. And their captain danced between them. Too slow, Sentaro. Naruto Uzumaki's voice was a cheerful boom that cut through the tension. He didn't raise his hand to block the punch aimed at his head, he simply tilted his neck an inch to the left. The fist, thrown with enough force to shatter stone, whistled past his ear, stirring the blonde spikes of his hair. "You're telegraphing with your shoulders again." Simultaneously, he dropped into a low crouch, the sweeping kick from his other third seat, Kion Katetsu, sailing harmlessly over him. His hand shot out, not to strike, but to tap the inside of her knee with two fingers. It was a gentle touch, almost dismissive, yet Kion's leg buckled instantly, her balance destroyed. "And you, Kion," he continued, still in that same infuriatingly calm tone, "you're relying on the same combination. Feint high, sweep low. It worked the first time. The second time was a maybe. The third time is a gift." He straightened up, his hands tucked casually into the pockets of his black hakama pants. He wore the standard Shinigami Shihakusho, but over it was a pure white haori, the kanji for 13, emblazoned on the back. It was a captain's haori, but he wore it unfastened, letting it billow behind him like a flag. It seemed less a uniform and more a statement. Sentaro Katsubuki roared and charged, his immense frame eating up the ground between them. He threw a furious 8-punch combination, each blow a piston of raw power. Naruto didn't retreat, he weaved, his body a fluid ribbon of motion, dodging each strike by the barest of margins. He looked like a man strolling through a heavy rain, somehow avoiding every drop. Kion, having recovered, darted in from his blind spot, A.W. Uden training Tonto clutched in her hand. She thrust towards his exposed kidney. "Better," Naruto complimented, his cerulean eyes crinkling at the corners. He didn't turn. Instead, the white sleeve of his haori snapped out, wrapping around Kion's wrist with impossible speed. With a sharp tug, he pulled her off balance, spinning her directly into the path of Sentaro's charge. The resulting Scion was a comical explosion of limbs and surprised yelps. The 2/3 seats ended up in a heap on the ground, groaning. The assembled squad members, who had been watching with rapt attention, erupted. Not in polite applause, but in boisterous, whooping laughter. Naruto walked over, offering a hand to each of his lieutenants. "You're getting faster. Both of you. Next time, you might actually land one." Sentaro took the hand, his massive form hauled to its feet as if he weighed nothing. "Captain," he grumbled, rubbing a bruised shoulder. "With all due respect, it feels like we're trying to punch a ghost." A very loud, very orange ghost. The squad laughed again. The atmosphere was light, familial. It was a stark contrast to the somber, almost melancholic pall that had hung over the 13th Division after the death of the gentle and universally beloved Jashiro Yukitake. The division had been adrift, a ship without a rudder. Then, this anomaly had arrived. Naruto Uzumaki had appeared in the Rukongai a few years back, a soul of such raw, untamed spiritual pressure that his very presence had set off alarms in the Seraite. He wasn't a product of the academy, he was a force of nature. Head Captain Yamamoto, wary but intrigued by this wellspring of power that felt somehow different, warmer, more vital, had taken him under his direct tutelage. The boy, or rather the man who looked like a boy, learned at a terrifying rate. He mastered Zanjutsu in months, Ho-Ho in weeks. Kido was a struggle, his control too bombastic for the delicate artistry it required, but his Hakuto was on par with masters. And his Ryutsu, it was a sun. A constant, blazing, golden sun of life energy. When he'd released his Shikai for the first time, it was said that the sickly flowers in the 4th Division's infirmary had bloomed out of season. When he'd achieved Bankai under the harshest training regimens, he hadn't just manifested a weapon, he'd temporarily terraformed a barren training ground into a lush, vibrant meadow. There was no question of his power. The only question was his temperament. He was loud, informal, and had a baffling obsession with a noodle dish from his past life. He treated the unseated officers with the same respect he gave lieutenants. He seemed utterly unimpressed by the rigid hierarchy of the Gote 13. Many of the older, more traditional captains saw him as a disruption. A problem. But for the grieving and rudderless 13th, he was a miracle. All right, that's enough for today, Naruto announced, clapping his hands together. Hit the baths. And then, his grin widened, a foxy, infectious thing, the first 20 to the mess hall get ramen on me. A chaotic, joyful cheer went up, and the squad broke apart, a stampede of black-robed Shinigami scrambling to be first. Kion and Sentaro exchanged a look, a shared expression of fond exasperation, before bowing to their captain and joining the rush. Naruto watched them go, the smile lingering on his face. He stretched, his back popping loudly. The energy of the place was good. It felt alive. It reminded him, just a little, of Konoha after the war. A place that had been broken but was learning to laugh again. He ambled towards the division's main building, a sprawling complex of wood and paper screens. Unlike the austere, almost militant barracks of other divisions like the 2nd or 6th, the 13th now had a lived-in, comfortable feel. Potted plants, which were mysteriously always healthy, lined the verandas. The sound of conversation and laughter echoed from within. He'd torn down the walls. Both literal and metaphorical. Squad meetings were often held over dinner, and his office door was, quite literally, always open. He slid into the mess hall, which was already buzzing with activity. A line had formed at the kitchens, where the cooks, under direct and very specific orders from their new captain, were ladling out steaming bowls of miso ramen. Naruto grabbed a bowl and found an empty spot at a long table. Squeezed between a young, freckle-faced new recruit and a grizzled veteran with a scarred eyebrow. "Captain," the young recruit stammered, nearly dropping his chopsticks. "Hey, Kenji," Naruto said, returning the clumsy bow with a nod. "How's your sister in District 45? "She's great, sir. The medicine you arranged for her worked wonders." Good. Tell her I said hi." He turned to the veteran. "Old man Hino, you're looking spry. The wife finally let you out of the house." The old Shinigami chuckled, a dry, rasping sound. "My wife could stare down an Ijukas, Captain. I'm only here because she kicked me out. Said you were paying for dinner and she wasn't going to pass up the savings." Naruto laughed, a deep, hearty sound that made the whole table smile. He slurped his noodles with gusto. The picture of contentment. It was in these moments, more than in the training yard, that he had won them over. Captain Yukitake had been a father to them, kind and gentle. This new captain was a brother. He was one of them, despite the chasm of power that separated them. He fought with them, ate with them, and knew their names. He knew their families. He was halfway through his second bowl when a hell butterfly fluttered into the noisy hall, its black wings a stark contrast to the warm light. It circled his head once before landing delicately on his finger. The telepathic voice, formal and clipped, echoed in his mind. "An emergency meeting of all captains has been called. Please assemble at the 1st Division barracks immediately." Naruto sighed, the warmth of the moment dissolving. He stood, placing his empty bowl down. "Duty calls," he said to the table at large. The laughter and chatter died down as all eyes turned to him. "Finish up. I'll be back later." He turned and strode out, his expression shifting from easygoing camaraderie to focused seriousness. The white houri billowed behind him, the number, 13, seeming to stand out in stark relief. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the seraite, and the air was beginning to cool. The walk to the 1st Division was a journey through the heart of the Gote 13's architectural and philosophical differences. He passed the 6th Division's headquarters, a monument to cold, perfect order. The lines were clean, the gardens meticulously manicured, the guards as silent and still as statues. He and its captain, Rukia Kuchiki, did not see eye to eye. Naruto found the place suffocating. He gave a wide berth to the 11th Division barracks, from which the usual sounds of a barely contained riot were spilling out. He could feel the jagged, hungry ryutsu of its captain, Kenpachi Zaraki, even from here. It felt like a blade scraping against his senses, and Naruto knew Kenpachi was likely grinning, anticipating his arrival at the meeting. He arrived at the massive, imposing gates of the 1st Division just as Captain Shunsui Kiraku of the 8th was ambling up, his usual floral pink haori thrown over his shoulders, a flask peeking from his sash. Naruto-kun, Shunsui greeted, his one visible eye crinkling in a lazy smile. Fancy seeing you here. I was hoping this was just a social call. But the head captain doesn't usually invite us all over for tea. Shunsui-san, Naruto nodded, falling into step beside the older captain. I was in the middle of a perfectly good bowl of ramen. This better be important. Ah, but isn't everything? Shunsui mused, taking a sip from his flask. The state of the world, the price of sake, the fleeting beauty of a spring blossom, it's all terribly important. Naruto grinned. He liked Shunsui. The man was eccentric and lazy on the surface, but underneath was one of the sharpest minds in the Seraite. He didn't judge Naruto for his methods, only for his results. They entered the vast meeting hall. Most of the other captains were already assembled, standing in 2 neat rows before the head captain's throne-like chair. The air was thick with a dozen different kinds of immense spiritual pressure, a silent, crushing display of power. At the head of it all, ancient and immovable, sat Genryusai Shigekuni Yamamoto. His eyes were closed, his hands resting on the head of his cane. He was the anchor around which the entire Gote 13 revolved. Naruto took his place in the line, between Shunsui and the towering, helmeted form of Sajin Komamura. Across from him, he could feel 2 sets of eyes on him. One was Kenpachi Zaraki, a wild, manic grin splitting his scarred face. His spiritual pressure was a physical thing, a promise of glorious violence. He'd been trying to get Naruto to agree to a real, no-holds-barred duel since the day Naruto had been promoted. The other gaze was infinitely colder. Rukia Kuchiki stood with perfect, aristocratic posture, his eyes half-lidded with disdain. He hadn't approved of Naruto's appointment, seeing the loud-mouthed, unconventional youth as an insult to the hallowed ranks of the Gote 13. Worse, Naruto was now the direct superior of his adopted sister, Rukia. The thought was a constant source of irritation for the noble captain. Naruto met Kenpachi's grin with a challenging smirk of his own. He ignored Rukia completely. Yamamoto's eyes snapped open, and the hall fell into absolute silence. I have convened this meeting to address a series of disturbing reports from the Department of Research and Development. The head captain's voice was like gravel grinding on stone. Mayuri Kuratsuchi, captain of the 12th Division, stepped forward, a grotesque, unsettling grin on his painted face. Indeed, head captain, my instruments have been detecting irregularities. Small pockets of spiritual energy in the Rukongai that flare into existence and then vanish without a trace. They leave no residue, no lingering reishi. It is as if a hole is being punched in the world and then patched over. Hollows. Toshiro Hitsugaya, the boy genius captain of the 10th, asked, his brow furrowed. No, Mayuri said, the word dripping with condescending delight. Hollow activity leaves a distinct signature. As do the Quincy's. This is something else entirely. Something new. It is a signature of nothingness. A low murmur went through the captains. Nothingness was not a concept that sat well with beings made of spiritual energy. And there is more, Yamamoto continued, his voice cutting through the noise. 30 minutes ago, one of these pockets appeared in the 78th district of the South Rukongai. It was larger, more stable. I dispatched the 5 seated officers of the FIF.TH division who were on patrol nearby to investigate. Captain Sosuke Aizen. No, he was gone. The 5th was still without a permanent captain, run by its capable lieutenant, Momo Hinamori. The memory was a ghost that still haunted them all. And Captain Retsu Unohana of the 4th asked, her voice calm and gentle as always. Yamamoto's gaze was grim. We lost contact with them 10 minutes ago. The IR spiritual signatures did not fade or disperse as they would in death. They simply ceased to exist. All 5, at the exact same moment. The hall was silent again, but this time it was a heavy, shocked silence. 5 seated officers, gone in an instant, without a fight, without a trace. My department has designated this phenomenon a silent hollow, Mayuri cackled, clearly thrilled by the new puzzle. A preliminary analysis suggests it somehow negates spiritual energy in its immediate vicinity. A fascinating, if crude, application of energy cancellation. So Kido would be useless, Shunsui murmured, his lazy demeanor gone. And a Zanpakuto's abilities might be suppressed, Byakuya added, his voice cold and analytical. Leaving only Zanjutsu and Hakuda. Kenpachi's grin widened. Sounds fun. Naruto's mind was already working. A creature that eats spiritual energy. An anti-Ryutsu field. It reminded him of some of the absorption jutsu Pain had used, but cruder, more absolute. If it negated abilities, then overwhelming it with raw, unshaped power might be the only way. Or, finding a way to overload it. Before anyone else could speak, a frantic voice echoed from the communication. Officer stationed at the hall's entrance. Head Captain. Urgent report. Another event. District 64, Sajin. It's a big one. The energy signature is massive. We've sent the on-call response team from Squad 9, but... Yamamoto didn't hesitate. All captains, you have your orders. The defense of the Seraite is paramount. Return to your divisions and await instructions. The captains bowed and began to file out. Their expressions ranging from grim determination to barely concealed excitement. Naruto turned to leave, but Yamamoto's voice stopped him. Captain Uzumaki. A moment. Naruto stopped, turning back to face the ancient commander. The other captains had gone. It was just the two of them in the vast, silent hall. The nature of this new threat, Yamamoto said, his old eyes boring into Naruto. It preys on spiritual energy. Your own Ryutsu is unique. It is not born of this world's cycle. It is a fusion of your soul's power and the divine chakra you carried in life. It is a wellspring of pure vitality. Naruto remained silent, waiting. It is possible, Yamamoto continued, that your energy will react differently to this phenomenon. It may be the key, but it may also make you a prime target. So, what's the order, old man? Naruto asked, his tone respectful but direct. You want me on the bench or you want me in the game? A flicker of something, amusement, perhaps, crossed Yamamoto's stern features. The Gote 13 does not have the luxury of benching a player like you. But do not be reckless. This is an unknown. Got it, Naruto said with a sharp nod. I'll be careful. He turned and left, his mind racing. District 64, Sajin. He knew it. A dusty, forgotten corner of the Rukongai, known for its poverty and lack of resources. The perfect place for something to fester unnoticed. He arrived back at the 13th Division at a run, his presence sending a ripple of tense anticipation through the barracks. The easy-going atmosphere was gone, replaced by the quiet, disciplined readiness of soldiers awaiting orders. Sentaro and Kion met him at the entrance, their faces grim. Captain, we heard the general alarm, Sentaro said. What are the orders? Kion asked. Squad 9's team is responding to a new type of hollow in Sajin, Naruto said, his voice crisp and authoritative. I'm going to provide support. You two are in charge here. Put the entire division on high alert. Full combat readiness. I want barriers checked and patrols doubled. Nobody goes anywhere alone. Understood, sir. They chorused. He was about to leave when a voice, quiet and formal, stopped him. Captain Uzumaki. He turned. Standing in the shadows of the veranda was a petite Shinigami with large, expressive violet eyes and neat, shoulder-length black hair. She clutched a report datapad to her chest. Her posture ramrod straight. Rukia Kuchiki. Since he'd taken over the 13th, their interactions had been brief and professional. She was diligent, efficient, and fiercely intelligent. She was also Captain Kuchiki's sister, and she carried herself with a guarded formality that Naruto hadn't yet managed to breach. He could feel the weight of expectation she carried, a burden that felt all too familiar. Kuchiki-san, he said, his tone softening slightly. What is it? I have the final patrol reports from the western sectors you requested, sir, she said, offering the datapad. He waved it away. No time for that now. I'm heading out. She blinked, her composure momentarily slipping. To District 64, sir, the reports on this new enemy are alarming. I know. Initial analysis from the 12th Division suggests keto-based attacks are ineffective, she pressed, her voice earnest. My own experience is primarily in that field, but I have extensive data on hundreds of keto spells and their reishi composition. If this thing works by negating spiritual particles, I might be able to find a frequency or composition that it can't process. She trailed off, as if suddenly realizing she was overstepping, lecturing her own captain. A faint blush rose on her cheeks. Naruto looked at her, truly looked at her. He saw the sharp mind working behind those serious eyes. She wasn't just reciting facts. She was problem-solving. Yamamoto's words echoed in his head. This is an unknown. He was powerful, yes, but raw power without intelligence was just recklessness. Mayuri was an analyst, but he was in a lab. Rukia was a field agent with a specialist's knowledge. His decision was instant. You're right, he said. Her eyes widened in surprise. Your analysis could be useful. Grab your Zanpakuto. You're with me. A flicker of shock, followed by a flash of something else. Determination crossed her face. She didn't hesitate. Yes, sir. She bowed crisply and vanished into the barracks, reappearing seconds later with the hilt of Soda no Shirayuki visible over her shoulder. Let's go, Naruto said, and with a burst of shunpo, they were gone, leaving Sentaro and Kion staring after them. They moved in silence, two blurs of black and white against the darkening sky. Naruto led the way, his spiritual senses stretched out, scanning the world below. Rukia kept pace just behind his shoulder, her movements precise and efficient. She was fast, impressively so for a non-seated officer at the time, but she could feel the effortless ease with which he moved. As a force of nature holding itself in check. His Ryutsu wasn't a crushing weight like Captain Zaraki's or an icy wall like her brother's. It was a constant, comforting warmth, like standing in the sun. But she knew, she'd heard the stories, that the sun could also burn. They arrived at the edge of District 64 in minutes. The change in atmosphere was instantaneous and deeply unsettling. Sound died, not just the ambient noise of the wind or the distant chatter of the Rukongai, but all of it. It was a thick, oppressive blanket of absolute silence. It felt like being underwater, the pressure building in their ears. What is this? Rukia whispered, and her voice was a dead thing, without echo or resonance. It's eating the vibrations, Naruto murmured, his own voice strangely flat. Sound, light, energy. It's a void. They dropped to the ground at the district's edge. Before them lay a scene of chilling stillness. The dusty, ramshackle streets of Sajin were deserted. In the center of the main road lay the bodies of the Squad 9 response team. There were 6 of them. They weren't wounded. There was no blood, no sign of a struggle. They were just lying there, their eyes wide and empty, their skin a pale, waxy gray. It looked as if their very life force had been sucked out of them. Rukia drew a sharp, silent breath, her hand tightening on the hilt of her Zanpakuto. She had seen death in all its gruesome forms. But this was different. This was erasure. Naruto's expression was hard as stone. He knelt by the nearest body, his fingers hovering just above the man's chest. His Ryutsu is gone. Not dissipated. Just gone. Like it was never there. He stood, his gaze sweeping the silent street. It's here. I can feel it. A hole in the world. From the shadows between 2 dilapidated buildings, it emerged. It wasn't large, no bigger than a man. It had a vaguely humanoid shape, but it was asymmetrical, its limbs mismatched and twitching. Its surface wasn't flesh or chitin, but a shimmering, roiling texture like television static, a vortex of black and gray and white. It had no face, no mouth, no eyes, only a smooth, blank space where they should be. And from it radiated that profound, soul-deepening silence. Rukia instinctively raised her hand. Bakudo number 1. Sigh. She incanted the spell perfectly, but the yellow energy that should have erupted to bind the creature's arms fizzled into nothingness a foot from her hand, absorbed by the oppressive silence. It's no good, Naruto said, his voice low. It's consuming the reishi before the spell can form. The silent hollow twitched, its featureless head turning towards them. It took a step, and the ground it passed over seemed to lose its color, turning a dull, lifeless gray. It was draining the life from the very earth. Then we must rely on Zanjutsu, Rukia said, drawing Soda no Shirayuki. The beautiful white blade seemed dimmer in the oppressive atmosphere. She settled into a ready stance, her training taking over. No, Naruto said, holding out an arm to stop her. Don't get close to it. Its field is its primary weapon. Then what do we do, Captain? She asked, her voice tight with tension. Naruto didn't answer. He just smiled, a small, confident quirk of his lips. Watch and learn, Kuchiki-san. He took a step forward, and a second Naruto Uzumaki shimmered into existence beside him. It wasn't a Gigai, and it wasn't a traditional clone. It was made of pure, solid, golden light. It was an exact replica, right down to the determined look on its face. Rukia stared. She'd heard rumors of his strange abilities. But seeing it was something else entirely. It was a technique born of his own unique power, a remnant of a life she couldn't possibly imagine. Go, the real Naruto said. The light clone nodded and charged. It drew its own Zanpakuto, also a construct of pure light, and lunged at the silent hollow. As the clone entered the creature's 10-foot aura of silence, the golden light of its body began to flicker and dim. The particles of its form being visibly siphoned away. But it was fast. It swung its light blade in a vicious arc. The silent hollow didn't dodge. It simply raised an arm, and the blade struck. There was no clang of impact. The light blade just dissolved, its energy consumed by the creature's static-like skin. The hollow then placed its hand on the clone's chest. For a terrifying second, the clone flared with brilliant golden light, pushing back against the encroaching void. Then, it imploded, vanishing into a swirl of nothingness that was greedily absorbed by the hollow. The creature stood still for a moment, as if processing the meal. Rukia felt a chill run down her spine. Captain, it devoured your technique completely. Yep, Naruto said, his eyes narrowed in concentration. It did, and it loved it. It's hungry for dense spiritual energy. He pointed. But look, it's slower now. It's digesting. He was right. The roiling static of its body had become sluggish, the movements less erratic. He'd used his own power as bait, sacrificing a piece of himself to learn his enemy's nature and create an opening. It was an incredibly risky, incredibly brilliant, and incredibly Naruto thing to do. So that's the weakness, he mused, more to himself than to her. It can eat anything, but it can't eat everything at once. If you give it too much, too fast. He took a deep breath. And the air around him changed. The gentle warmth of his Ryutsu exploded into a blazing inferno. Golden energy, raw and untamed, erupted from him in a visible torrent, the sheer pressure cracking the dead earth beneath his feet. The oppressive silence was shattered, pushed back by the sheer, overwhelming presence of his power. For the first time, Rukia could hear the blood pounding in her own ears again. The world had sound once more. He didn't draw his blade. He didn't incant a spell. He just pulled his right fist back, and the golden energy swirled around it, compressing G into a furiously spinning sphere of pure, unadulterated power. It wasn't a Kido spell. It was a physical manifestation of his will, a miniature sun held in the palm of his hand. It's like a feast, he said, a predatory grin spreading across his face. And this thing is starving. He vanished. He didn't use Shunpo, not exactly. It was faster, more explosive. One moment he was standing beside her. The next he was directly in front of the silent hollow, his fist cocked back. The creature, sensing the colossal meal before it, reached out with both of its static-filled hands, ready to consume him whole. Eat this, Naruto snarled. He thrust his fist forward. The spinning sphere of golden light slammed into the hollow's chest. There was no explosion, not at first. There was only a blinding, silent flash of golden light. The silent hollow, the creature that consumed all energy, had just been hit with a source so potent, so overwhelming, that it couldn't process it. It was like trying to drink from a fire hose. The creature's form swelled, its static texture flickering violently as it tried to absorb the infinite meal it had been given. It bloated to twice, then 3 times its size, its form distorting grotesquely. Then, with a soundless, final pop, it imploded. It didn't disintegrate into reishi. It didn't fade away. It collapsed in on itself, creating a tiny, fleeting vortex of absolute blackness that immediately winked out of existence, leaving nothing. The golden light faded. Naruto stood in the center of the road, his fist still extended, smoke gently rising from his knuckles. The oppressive silence was gone, replaced by the natural, gentle whisper of the wind through the desolate streets. The world felt normal again. Rukia could only stare, her mind struggling to process what she had just witnessed. She had seen captains fight. She had seen Bankai. She had seen her brother Senbon Sakura Kageyoshi reduce enemies to dust. But this was different. This wasn't an elegant technique or a complex ability. It was the application of pure, unbridled power, wielded with the precision of a scalpel and the force of a meteor. He hadn't just defeated the enemy, he had fundamentally overpowered the concept on which it operated. Naruto lowered his arm, his breathing steady. The blazing aura around him subsided, returning to its usual gentle warmth. He walked back towards her, his expression no longer fierce, but thoughtful. "You okay, Kuchiki-san?" he asked, his voice normal again. She found her own voice after a moment. Yes, Captain. I am." She looked at the spot where the creature had been. What was that?" "Just a little something from my old life," he said with a casual shrug, as if he hadn't just broken the known laws of spiritual physics. He knelt down where the hollow had imploded, his brow furrowed in concentration. The ground was untouched, except for a small patch that was even grayer and more lifeless than the rest. "What is it?" Rukia asked, joining him. "The residue," Naruto said, his voice low and serious. "When a hollow dies, it dissolves into reishi. Its spirit particles are purified and return to the cycle. But this," he waved his hand over the spot. "There's nothing here. No reishi. No energy. It's not just empty. It feels like a hole. A piece of the world that's been scooped out and thrown away." He looked up at her, his usual bright, cerulean eyes now dark with a dawning, grim understanding. The cheerful, ramen-loving captain was gone, replaced by the war-forged veteran who recognized a threat that went beyond simple monsters and battles. "This wasn't just a hollow," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "This was a weapon, and this was a test." The wind picked up, swirling dust around their feet. The Seraite was safe for now. The immediate threat was gone. But standing in the silent, empty street in a forgotten corner of the Rukongai, staring at a patch of ground that was a literal void, Naruto Uzumaki knew something terrible had just taken its first step out of the shadows. And the Gote 13 was not ready for it. Chapter 1 End. Chapter 2. The Weight of a Ghost. The return journey to the Seraite was a study in contrasts. Outside, the world was the same. The wind whispered, the sky was a deep velvet blanket pricked with stars, and the distant lights of the Gote 13's fortress were a comforting beacon. Inside Rukia Kuchiki's mind, however, a storm was raging. She ran beside her captain, her feet barely touching the ground, her body moving on pure, ingrained instinct. But her thoughts were a chaotic whirlwind, replaying the last 10 minutes on a loop. The oppressive silence, the creature of static and void. And then, the sun. The raw, overwhelming torrent of golden energy that had erupted from Naruto Uzumaki. It wasn't just the power that had shaken her. She was a Shinigami of the Gote 13. She had stood in the presence of Kenpachi Zaraki's bloodlust and her own brother's chillingly perfect Ryutsu. Power was a known quantity. This was different. Naruto's power didn't feel like a weapon to be wielded. It felt like a fundamental force of existence, like gravity or life itself. When he had unleashed that spinning sphere, it hadn't felt like an attack. It had felt like a declaration. "I am here, and you are not." He glanced over at her, his shunpo not faltering for an instant. The fierce, predatory light was gone from his eyes, replaced by a thoughtful concern. "You're quiet, Kuchiki-san." Still processing. She was, but admitting it felt like admitting a weakness. "The nature of the enemy was unexpected, Captain. I am merely collating the data for my report." It was a deflection, a retreat into the familiar comfort of duty and formality. A small smile touched his lips, one that told her he saw right through it. "Right, the report." He didn't push. He just turned his gaze forward again, a silent allowance of her defenses. That, somehow, was more disarming than any question he could have asked. They didn't return to the 13th Division. Naruto led them directly to the imposing central spire of the 1st. Guards snapped to attention as he approached, their eyes wide. Ning slightly as they recognized his companion. Captain Uzumaki was already a legend, but seeing him appear out of the night with a member of his squad, both radiating the faint, sharp tang of a recent battle, was another thing entirely. "The head captain is expecting us," Naruto said to the lead guard, his voice leaving no room for argument. The guard simply bowed and opened the massive doors. EY found head captain Yamamoto not in the formal meeting hall, but in his private office, a stark, traditional room, the air thick with the scent of old paper and burning incense. He sat behind a low wooden desk, his ancient eyes fixed on a scroll. The only other person present was Captain Kyoraku, who was lounging against a wall, his Sakazuki hat tipped low over his face. "Head captain," Naruto said, giving a short, respectful bow. Rukia, a step behind him, executed a much deeper, more formal one. Yamamoto looked up, his gaze sweeping over them. It lingered on Rukia for a fraction of a second, an unspoken acknowledgement of her presence, before settling on Naruto. "Report, Captain Uzumaki. The target, this, silent hollow, was neutralized," Naruto began, his voice clear and concise. "District 64 is secure. The bodies of the Squad 9 team were recovered. I've had them sent to the 4th for Captain Unohana's examination. The method of neutralization." Yamamoto's voice was a low rumble. "It consumes spiritual energy," Naruto explained. "Kido is ineffective. Zanpakuto abilities are likely suppressed within its immediate field. It appears to be a living vacuum. I theorized that it had a processing limit. I fed it a highly concentrated, raw burst of my own Ryutsu, more than it could absorb at once. It overloaded and imploded." Shunsui let out a low whistle from his corner. "You fed the monster until it burst. My, Naruto-kun. That's either brilliant or insane." "Little of both, probably," Naruto admitted without missing a beat. He then knelt, mirroring the gesture he'd made on the street in Sajin. "The real issue is what it left behind. Or rather, what it didn't. There was no reishi dispersal. No purification. Just a void. A patch of nothing where it died." Officer Kuchiki was present and can corroborate. Quote, Yamamoto's gaze shifted to Rukia. The full weight of the Gote 13's founder was a heavy thing to bear. She felt her spine straighten instinctively. "Captain Uzumaki's report is accurate. Head captain, I attempted to use Bakudo, but the spell was consumed before it could manifest. The area around the creature was null. After its destruction, the spot where it imploded felt like a scar on the world itself. Utterly empty." Yamamoto stroked his long, white beard, his knuckles gnarled and ancient. "A weapon that does not kill, but erases. That does not leave a body, but a hole." He looked at Naruto. "Your assessment?" "This is a new player on the board, and they're not playing by our rules," Naruto said grimly. "This wasn't a random monster. It was deliberately deployed in a low-traffic area. The first attack on the 5th's officers, the second on Squad 9's team, they were tests. They're gathering data, probing our response times, our capabilities. And now, they have data on me." The room was silent for a long moment, the implications of Naruto's words settling like a shroud. This wasn't a war for territory or souls. This was an intelligence game. And they were already a step behind. "Shunsui," Yamamoto said, his voice sharp. "Double the patrols on the perimeter. I want the Kido Corps reinforcing the Shikanmaku barrier around the clock. ND get me everything we have on historical accounts of spiritual erasure, no matter how apocryphal. Check the great archives, even the forbidden sections. On it," Shunsui said, pushing off the wall. His lazy demeanor had vanished, replaced by the focused intensity of a veteran commander. He gave Naruto a grim nod as he passed. "Good work out there, you two." Once Shunsui was gone, Yamamoto's gaze returned to them. "This investigation is now your primary responsibility, Captain Uzumaki. You are the only one who has successfully engaged and destroyed one of these entities. Your unique spiritual makeup is our only advantage. Take whatever resources you need." He then looked directly at Rukia. "Officer Kuchiki, your analytical skills have been noted. You will continue to assist Captain Uzumaki in this investigation. You are officially seconded to this assignment, effective immediately. Rukia's heart skipped a beat. A direct assignment from the head captain himself. It was an honor, but it was also a crushing weight. Yes, head captain. Go, Yamamoto commanded, already turning back to his scrolls. Find out who sent this silence to our doorstep. And find out what they want. They bowed and exited the office. The heavy doors closing behind them. The cool night air felt like a release. They stood on the steps of the First Division, the rest of the Seraite spread out before them like a sea of dark rooftops. Well, Naruto said, breaking the silence. Looks like we're partners, Kuchiki-san. It would seem so, Captain, she replied, her mind still reeling. Where do we begin? We begin, he said, a determined glint in his eye, by visiting the one person in all of Soul Society who enjoys things that don't make sense. He grinned. Time to go see Mayuri Kuratsuchi. The headquarters of the 12th Division and the Shinigami Research and Development Institute was a place that actively tried to unnerve you. The architecture was a bizarre fusion of traditional Soul Society woodwork and pulsating, vaguely organic-looking technology. Tubes and pipes snaked along the walls like metallic vines, and the air hummed with a low, discordant thrum. The smell was a nauseating mix of antiseptic, ozone, and something faintly sweet, like rotting fruit. Rukia had always hated this place. It felt like a monument to everything unnatural. Naruto, by contrast, seemed completely unfazed. He strode through the corridors as if he were walking through a public park, ignoring the strange liquids bubbling in glass vats and the disembodied limbs twitching in electrified tanks. They found Mayuri in his main laboratory. A vast, cavern-like room cluttered with bizarre machinery and holographic screens displaying streams of incomprehensible data. The captain of the 12th Division was hunched over a dissection table, gleefully probing one of the recovered bodies from Squad 9 with a series of wicked-looking instruments. His lieutenant, Nemu, stood silently by his side, her expression as blank as ever. Ah, Captain Uzumaki, Mayuri cackled without looking up, his voice echoing unnaturally in the cavernous lab. And you've brought one of the little Kuchiki sparrows with you. How delightful. Have you come to watch the show? I'm at the most fascinating part. He held up a lung, which looked strangely deflated and gray. Observe. The cellular structure has undergone a complete reishi collapse. The spiritual particles haven't been damaged. They've been unwritten. It's as if the soul's very blueprint has been dipped in acid. Magnificent. Rukia felt a wave of nausea. Naruto's expression didn't change. We're not here for a show, Mayuri, Naruto said, his tone flat. We're here for information. You said your instruments detected these things. Where? I want patterns, locations, energy signatures. Anything that can give us a lead. Mayuri finally turned, his painted face contorting into a mask of theatrical disappointment. Information. How dreadfully boring. How, is so much more stimulating than the where. But, very well, he gestured lazily to Nemu. Nemu, show our boorish guests the temporal spatial event logs. Nemu bowed silently and tapped a command into a large console. A massive holographic map of the Rukongai shimmered into existence in the center of the room. Dozens of small, red dots pulsed on the map. These are the locations of the anomalous energy pockets my instruments have detected over the past month, Mayuri explained, striding around the map with the air of a proud artist. Notice the distribution. They are not random. They are concentrated in the outer districts. Places with low spiritual density, high poverty, and a distinct lack of Gote 13 oversight. Naruto and Rukia studied the map. He was right. The dots formed a loose, scattered ring around the more populated central districts, avoiding them completely. They're staying off our radar, Rukia murmured, tracing the pattern with her eyes. Testing their weapons, in places they're least likely to be noticed. Precisely, little sparrow, Mayuri chirped. But there's more. He pointed to a cluster of 3 dots in a remote, mountainous region to the north, far from any numbered district. These 3 are different. They occurred in the same location, a place designated simply as the Ashen Valley. It's a desolate, spiritually barren region. Nothing has lived there for centuries. Why would they target a place that is already dead? Naruto's eyes narrowed. Rehearsal. Or maybe, a staging ground. He looked at Rukia. That's our next stop. He turned back to Mayuri. Thanks for the help. Help. Mayuri laughed, a high, grating sound. My dear Captain, this wasn't help. This was a transaction. You've given me a fascinating new puzzle to solve, and in return, I've pointed you towards a potentially lethal dead end. I consider it a fair trade. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a spleen to deconstruct. He turned back to his table, humming a discordant tune. Naruto just shook his head and gestured for Rukia to follow him out. He's unsettling, Rukia said once they were back in the unsettlingly clean corridors. He's useful, Naruto corrected. And he just gave us our first real lead. Let's not waste it. The Ashen Valley was well named. It was a long, winding canyon carved through a range of jagged, gray mountains, a place the sun seemed reluctant to touch. The ground was covered in a fine, pale dust that wasn't sand or dirt, but the petrified remains of ancient trees that had been flash fossilized by some long-forgotten cataclysm. The air was thin and cold, and the silence was deep and natural, a far cry from the oppressive, manufactured silence of the hollow. There was no life here. No birds, no insects, no plants. The spiritual environment was so barren it felt like it was actively leeching their own energy away just by being there. I can see why no one comes here, Rukia said, pulling her shihakusho tighter around her. It feels hungry. It's a graveyard, Naruto said, his gaze sweeping the desolate landscape. But something was here, recently. He pointed. On the fine gray dust, almost invisible, were footprints. They weren't from Shinigami Waraji or human shoes. They were light, almost indistinct impressions, as if made by someone wearing soft-soled slippers. More importantly, there was a strange pattern to them. They led from the valley entrance towards a sheer cliff face and then stopped. There were no return tracks. They followed the tracks to the base of the cliff, a towering wall of gray rock. The footprints ended abruptly in front of the smooth, unbroken stone. A dead end, Rukia mused, running her hand over the cold rock. Perhaps they used flight to leave. No, Naruto said, his eyes narrowed. He placed his own hand on the cliff face, closing his eyes. His ryutsu, usually a comforting warmth, felt different now. It was focused, probing, like a sonar pulse. Rukia could feel it spreading through the rock. A subtle vibration under her own fingertips. There's something here. A Kido seal. Old. Very old. It's designed to mask, not to block. He took a step back, his eyes still closed. It's a perception filter. It makes you see a solid wall. But it's keyed to a specific spiritual frequency. If you don't match it, you can't see the entrance, Rukia finished, her eyes widening in understanding. A secret entrance, hidden in plain sight for centuries. Exactly. Naruto opened his eyes, a flicker of that golden energy dancing in their depths. But any lock can be picked. He placed his palm flat against the rock again. This time, he didn't probe. He pushed. A gentle, steady stream of his own unique, vital energy flowed into the cliff face. It wasn't a blast of power. It was a quiet, insistent hum, like a tuning fork. He was trying to resonate with the ancient Kido, not break it. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, the rock in front of them began to shimmer, like a heat haze. Intricate, glowing blue lines. A complex matrix of Kido script she had never seen before, flared to life across the stone. The symbols were angular and arcane, unlike the flowing script of modern Kido. The shimmer intensified, and then the image of the solid wall dissolved, revealing a dark, square opening, a doorway leading into the heart of the mountain. Whoa, Naruto breathed, clearly impressed. Whoever built this was good. This Kido is ancient, Rukia whispered, her scholar's mind captivated. It predates the Gote 13's formation. What is a place like this doing out here? A cold draft flowed out of the doorway, carrying with it a scent of dust, ozone, and something else. Something metallic and bitter, like old blood. Only one way to find out, Naruto said, his hand resting on the hilt of his Zanpakuto. He gave her a questioning look. Ready, she nodded, her own hand finding the familiar comfort of Soda no Shirayuki. Ready, Captain. They stepped through the doorway, from gray twilight of the valley into absolute darkness. Naruto held up a hand, and a small, soft sphere of golden light bloomed into existence, hovering above his palm and casting a warm, gentle glow around them. They were in a long, straight corridor carved from the same gray rock. The walls were unnervingly smooth, and at regular intervals, they were inscribed with more of the strange, angular symbols. These ones etched into the stone and filled with a black, tar-like substance that seemed to absorb the light. The place felt profoundly wrong. It was a shrine, Rukia realized, but not to any god she knew. It was a place of worship for something cold and empty. The air grew heavier with every step, thick with a palpable sense of despair. It clung to her skin, a psychic residue left behind by centuries of forgotten negative emotion. They came to a large, circular chamber at the end of the corridor. In the center of the chamber was a low, black altar of polished obsidian. The walls were covered in a single, vast mural, carved into the stone and painted with the same black substance. It depicted a chilling scene, a great, swirling vortex of nothingness, and from it, faceless figures were emerging. Their hands outstretched as they tore apart representations of the Seraite, the world of the living, and even Hueco Mundo. Cosmic reunification through dissolution, a voice whispered in her memory. Mayuri's analysis, a philosophy of unmaking. This was their temple, but it was the altar that held her attention. On it, something was laid out. It was a tattered piece of a Shinigami's Shihakusho. Specifically, it was the sleeve of a lieutenant's uniform. And on it was the insignia of a white lily, the symbol of the Shiba clan. The world tilted. The smell of ozone and bitter blood wasn't just in the air. It was in her memory. The heavy, oppressive ryutsu of a hollow-fused monstrosity. The feeling of her own blade, Sota no Shirayuki, piercing flesh. Not the hollows, but his. The warmth of his blood on her hands. Thank you, Rukia, you did the right thing. Kyan Shiba's smile, his kind, laughing eyes. The way he'd ruffled her hair. The way he'd made her feel like she belonged. Like she wasn't just a strange girl from the Rukongai playing at being a noble. And then, his face twisting in agony. The hollow's mask cracking, revealing his eye, filled with despair and gratitude. The weight of his body collapsing against hers. The blood, so much blood. Rukia, Naruto's voice was a distant echo from across a vast, roaring sea of guilt. Her hand, the one not on her zanpakuto, was trembling. Cold, so cold, she could feel the hilt of the blade, not the one at her hip, but the one in her memory, slick and wet. She had killed him. She had run away. She hadn't told his wife, his family. She had let her brother pull her away, hide her away behind the walls of the Kuchiki manor, burying the shame under a mountain of duty and propriety. But it was still there. A ghost that lived inside her. This place, it was amplifying it. The despair in the air was a tuning fork, and the guilt in her soul was resonating with it, shaking her apart from the inside. Her breath hitched. The warm light from Naruto's hand seemed to be dimming, the shadows in the room growing long and distorted, twisting into the shape of that monstrous, smiling hollow. Rukia. This time the voice was closer. A hand settled gently on her shoulder. It was warm. Incredibly, impossibly warm. It wasn't a grip of command or a shake to snap her out of it. It was just there. A point of anchor in the swirling chaos of her memory. She blinked, and the chamber swam back into focus. Naruto was standing in front of her, his expression unreadable. The sphere of light hovered between them, casting his face in stark relief. He wasn't looking at her with pity. He was looking at her with a quiet, profound understanding. He didn't speak. He just retracted his hand and walked over to the other side of the chamber. Sitting down with his back against the cold, carved wall, he rested his elbows on his knees, his hands clasped before him, and he waited. The silence stretched. It wasn't the hungry silence of the hollow. It was a patient silence. A silence that gave her space to breathe, to find her footing. He wasn't demanding an explanation. He wasn't offering empty platitudes. He was simply sharing the crushing weight of the room with her. Slowly, the roaring in her ears subsided. The trembling in her hand eased. She took a shuddering breath, then another. She looked at the tattered sleeve on the altar, the symbol of her greatest failure. And then at the man sitting across from her. I killed him, she whispered, the words tasting like ash. My lieutenant, Kyan Shiba, he was possessed by a hollow. I killed them both. The confession, spoken aloud for the first time to someone outside her own family, hung in the air, heavy and raw. Naruto didn't flinch. He just nodded slowly, his gaze fixed on the floor in front of him. I know the feeling. His voice was quiet, stripped of its usual boisterous energy. It was the voice of the veteran she'd seen a glimpse of in Yamamoto's office. When I was young, he began. His voice a low murmur. I had a teammate. My best friend. My brother. I failed to stop him from leaving our village, from choosing a path of darkness and revenge. I fought him. I nearly killed him, but I failed to bring him home. For years, that failure was the only thing I could think about. It was a shadow that followed me everywhere. He looked up, his blue eyes meeting hers across the chamber. They held no judgment, only a shared, weary sorrow. During the last great war in my world, he continued, a friend died to protect me. He shielded me with his own body. His name was Neji. He was a genius, a prodigy from a clan much like yours, noble, proud, bound by tradition. And he died because I wasn't strong enough, not fast enough. His last words were about how my life was now in my hands. He put his future, his family's hope, everything, on my shoulders. For a long time, I couldn't breathe without feeling the weight of that. He leaned his head back against the wall, staring up at the dark, carved ceiling. You can't save everyone, Rukia. It's the first and hardest lesson for people like us. We carry the ones we couldn't save. They become a part of us. A weight. But you can't let it crush you. All you can do is stand up a little straighter, get a little stronger, so you can carry them properly. You honor their memory not by drowning in the past, but by using the strength they gave you to protect the future. He looked back at her, a flicker of his usual warmth returning to his eyes. This Kyan Shiba, from what I've heard, he sounds like a guy who would be pretty pissed if he knew his memory was being used to chain you down. Tears welled in Rukia's eyes, hot and sharp. But they weren't tears of guilt. They were tears of release. He hadn't absolved her. He hadn't dismissed her pain. He had simply sat down in the dark with her, taken out his own ghosts, and shown her that she wasn't alone in her haunting. He had validated her burden by showing her his own. In that moment, the towering figure of her brother, the suffocating expectations of her clan, the years of silent, self-imposed penance, they all seemed a little smaller. A little lighter. Before she could find the words to thank him, a sudden, sharp spike of Ryutsu from the corridor shattered the moment. It was cold and alien. Naruto was on his feet in an instant, the gentle Sphi ray of light in his hand vanishing as his entire posture shifted into one of lethal readiness. Company's here, he growled. They burst from the corridor into the chamber, 3 of them. 3 silent hollows, identical to the one they'd fought in Sajin, their forms roiling with static. But this time, they weren't alone. Behind them, stepping out of the shadows, was a tall, cloaked figure. The cloak was a deep, starless black, and a simple, white, porcelain mask, completely devoid of features, covered their face. The figure didn't radiate a spiritual pressure in the way a Shinigami or an Arankar did. Instead, it radiated a chilling, profound sense of purpose. It was the shepherd, and it had brought its flock. The cloaked figure raised a hand and pointed at Naruto. The anomaly, it said, its voice a synthesized, multi-layered whisper that seemed to come from everywhere at once. The false sun, your light is a lie. It perpetuates the prison. We will extinguish it. The 3 hollows surged forward. Naruto moved to intercept them, but Rukia was faster. Captain, the one on the left is mine. Her voice was clear, sharp, and utterly devoid of the hesitation that had crippled her moments before. She flashed forward, her shunpo crisp and precise. Naruto, seeing the fire in her eyes, didn't argue. He adjusted his own trajectory, creating 2 light clones to engage the other 2 hollows, while he himself moved to intercept the cloaked figure. Rukia faced her opponent. The memory of her last encounter, the way her Kido had fizzled into nothing, was fresh in her mind. But so were Naruto's words. Use the strength they gave you. Kyan had taught her not just how to fight, but how to think. The hollow lunged. Rukia didn't try a direct attack. She sidestepped, letting it pass, and as it did, she thrust her hand towards the ground. Bakudo number 61. Raikujokuro, 6-rod light prison. But she didn't target the hollow. She targeted 6 points on the floor around the hollow. The 6 pillars of light erupted from the ground. But instead of forming a cage, they were instantly consumed by the creature's nullification field. It was exactly what she wanted. The hollow, drawn by the sudden feast of spiritual energy, paused for a fraction of a second, its form swelling as it absorbed the Kido. It was a tiny window. But it was enough. Dance, Sota no Shirayuki. She commanded, releasing her Shikai. Her blade transformed into a thing of pure, alabaster beauty. A wave of intense cold billowed from her. Some no Mai, Tsukashiro, first dance, white moon. She didn't aim for the hollow. She aimed for the ground beneath it. A perfect circle of ice erupted on the floor, freezing the petrified dust. The hollow, its feet now trapped in the rapidly expanding ice, was momentarily rooted to the spot. It was still consuming the energy from her Bakudo, its attention divided. Some no San, Shirafune, third dance, white sword. A blade of pure ice extended from the tip of her Zanpakudo, lancing forward. But again, she didn't aim for the hollow's body. She aimed for the ground directly in front of it. The ice blade shattered the frozen floor, creating a spray of razor-sharp ice shards and destabilizing the creature's footing. She was hurting it, controlling its position, exploiting its hunger, using her abilities not as direct weapons but as tools to manipulate the battlefield. It was a strategy born of desperation and brilliance. Meanwhile, Naruto's battle was one of pure, overwhelming force. His two clones, blazing with golden light, slammed into their respective hollows. They didn't try to cut them. They grappled them, wrapping them in embraces of suicidal, self-consuming energy. The hollows greedily began to absorb the clones, their forms bloating and slowing as they were force-fed a banquet of raw power. The real Naruto closed the distance to the cloaked figure. He threw a punch, a blur of motion aimed at the blank porcelain mask. The figure didn't try to block. It simply took a half step back, and Naruto's fist passed through the space where its head had been. It was unnervingly fast. Your existence is a blasphemy, the synthesized voice whispered, as the figure produced a long, thin, black shard that looked like solidified shadow. It stabbed forward, not with force, but with an eerie precision. Naruto dodged, the shard passing inches from his face. He could feel the wrongness of it. It didn't cut the air, it unmade it, leaving a momentary vacuum in its wake. You talk too much, Naruto grunted, deflecting another stab with the back of his gauntlet. He felt a chilling cold where the shard made contact, a patch of his Ryutsu simply vanishing. He saw Rukia out of the corner of his eye. She had the third hollow exactly where she wanted it, off balance, distracted, and anchored. Now, Captain, she yelled. Naruto didn't need to be told twice. He disengaged from the cloaked figure with an explosive burst of speed, appearing directly above Rukia's trapped hollow. He didn't form a Rasengan this time. He just channeled his raw, golden Ryutsu into his blade, Koyo. Illuminate, he roared. The simple katana erupted in a column of blinding, pure sunlight. He brought it down in a two-handed cleave. The blade didn't cut the hollow. It passed through it, and in its wake, the creature of static and silence was simply gone. Annihilated not by force, but by the sheer, absolute conceptual opposite of its existence. Light had banished the shadow. At the same instant, Naruto's two clones, having served their purpose, detonated, overloading and destroying the other two hollows in a pair of silent implosions. The chamber fell silent. The cloaked figure stood motionless for a second, its blank mask facing them. It tilted its head, an unnervingly curious gesture. The anomaly is more potent than anticipated. Data recorded. The harvest will proceed. With that, it seemed to dissolve into the shadows along the wall, its form breaking apart into motes of darkness that simply ceased to be. It didn't use Shunpo or Sonido. It just left. The warm glow from Naruto's Shikai subsided, his blade returning to its normal state. The only sounds in the chamber were their own harsh breaths. Rukia deactivated her Shikai, her heart pounding with a mixture of adrenaline and a dawning sense of triumph. She hadn't been a liability. She had been a partner. She had faced the ghost of her past. And then she had faced a monster, and she had not faltered. Naruto walked over to her, a wide, genuine grin spreading across his face. That, he said, his voice full of sincere admiration, was one of the smartest damn things I've ever seen. Using its hunger against it, controlling the terrain, you were thinking 3 steps ahead, Kuchiki-san. Praise from her brother was a rare, formal acknowledgement of duty fulfilled. Praise from Naruto was a bright, warm thing that settled deep in her chest. A fierce blush rose to her cheeks, and for once, she didn't try to hide it behind a wall of formality. I was just applying what I know, Captain, she stammered. Call me Naruto, he said, the grin softening into something gentler. I think we're past the point of, Captain, don't you? She looked at him, at this impossible, sunny, ridiculously powerful man who had sat with her in the dark and shared the weight of his ghosts. The professional barrier between them, the one she had so carefully maintained, hadn't just been cracked. It had been shattered. Naruto, she said, testing the name on her tongue. It felt strange. It felt right. He nodded, satisfied. All right, Rukia, let's get out of this depressing hole. We've got a lot to report. And, he added, his foxy grin returning in full force, I'm betting the mess hall has some leftover ramen. As they walked back down the dark corridor and out into the pale, gray light of the Ashen Valley, Rukia felt a lightness she hadn't experienced in years. The ghost of Kai Shiba was still with her. It always would be, but for the first time, it didn't feel like a chain. It felt like a memory, a weight she could now carry. The mystery of the cloaked figure and their silent army was deeper and more terrifying than ever. A new war was brewing on the horizon. But as she walked beside the man who was a living sun, she found she wasn't afraid. Chapter 2 End. Chapter 3. The Purifier's Sermon. The office of T. He captain of the 13th Division had become Naruto's sanctuary. It wasn't grand or imposing like the offices of other captains. The large shoji screens were almost always thrown open to the veranda, letting in the sounds of the division and the scent of the small but meticulously cared for garden he'd planted himself. Bookshelves overflowed with everything from dense Keto theory to Rukongai folklore. A low table, perpetually littered with mission scrolls and at least one empty ramen cup, sat in the center of the room instead of a formal desk. It was less a command center and more a living room. Naruto was hunched over that table, a brush in his hand, painstakingly trying to fill out a standard requisition form. His tongue was stuck out in concentration, his kanji characters clumsy and childlike. It was a cruel irony that a man who could command the fundamental forces of life struggled so profoundly with paperwork. You're holding the brush wrong again, a quiet voice observed from the doorway. Naruto looked up to see Rukia standing there, a small stack of reports in her arms. In the days since their mission to the Ashen Valley, the formal barrier between them had evaporated. He still addressed him with respect during official squad functions, but in private moments like this, an easy, comfortable rapport had settled between them. It's a stick with hair on it dipped in ink, he grumbled, wiping a smudge of black from his nose. There's only so many ways you can hold it. How am I supposed to request more medical supplies for the Western barracks if I can't even write antiseptic? She glided into the room, a small smile playing on her lips. Here, she said, setting her reports down. She stood behind him, her presence a familiar warmth at his back. She gently took his hand, repositioning his fingers on the brush. Her touch was light, clinical, but it sent a strange jolt through him. Like this, it's about balance, not pressure. Let the brush do the work. He tried again, and to his astonishment, the character for medicine came out passably neat. Hey, not bad. He grinned up at her. You're a good teacher, Rukia. The use of her given name still brought a faint blush to her cheeks. But she met his grin with a roll of her eyes. I am a competent officer, Naruto. Assisting my captain with his literacy challenges falls under my duties. Ouch, he laughed. And here I thought we were having a moment. He was about to retort when something on the form he'd just been working on caught his eye. The ink was moving. He blinked, thinking his eyes were playing tricks on him. But it was real. The wet, black ink of the characters he and Rukia had just written was writhing, pulling away from the paper, lifting into the air like microscopic strands of black smoke. The strands coalesced, forming a small, dark cloud that hovered for a second before dissipating into nothing. The requisition form was now blank, the paper pristine and untouched, as if it had just been made. Rukia gasped, taking a step back. What? Naruto was on his feet in an instant, his playful demeanor gone. His eyes were narrowed, scanning the room. An enemy technique, he said, his voice a low growl. His hand went to the hilt of his katana, Koyo. Before either of them could move, the paper on the table began to change. Not with new ink, but from within the fibers of the paper itself. Dark lines bled into existence, forming elegant, sharp-edged kanji. It was as if the message were being unwritten from the very fabric of the page. It was the same conceptual wrongness as the Ashen Valley. The same power of unmaking, but used with chilling precision. The message was simple and direct. The anomaly. The sparrow. We have observed your methods. We offer a parley, a sermon for the misguided. Karakura Town. The rooftop garden of the Grand Miyako Hotel. Midnight. Come alone. Come to be enlightened. Naruto stared at the message, a cold knot tightening in his stomach. This wasn't a challenge to a fight. This was an invitation to a lecture. It was arrogant, it was confident, and it was deeply unsettling. Karakura Town. Rukia breathed, reading over his shoulder. In the world of the living. They want to meet on neutral ground. They don't want a fight, Naruto said, his fingers tracing the unnatural script. They want to talk. They want to preach. He looked at Rukia, his expression grim. They called you, the sparrow. They know who you are. They've been watching us. It's a trap, obviously, she said, her voice firm. Of course it's a trap, he agreed. But it's also an opportunity. Yamamoto put us on this investigation to find out who they are and what they want. They're offering to tell us. We can't pass that up. You can't be considering going. We have to. He turned to face her. His decision already made. Look, if they wanted to fight, they could have ambushed us here and now. They used this weird paper trick. It's a show of force, sure, but it's also a gesture of non-aggression. They're not inviting us to a duel, they're inviting us to a debate. And an enemy who wants to debate is an enemy who's going to tell you exactly what they believe in. His logic was sound, but every instinct she had screamed against it. The head captain's orders were to investigate, not to consort with a hostile power. This is investigating, he countered, his voice firm but not unkind. The best way to understand your enemy is to listen to them. Especially when they're arrogant enough to think they can convert you. He paused, then gave her a wry smile. Besides, I've had some experience with people who thought they could talk me into giving up. He was thinking of Nagato, of Obito. Men who had tried to break him with philosophies of despair. He had met their words not with counter-arguments, but with unwavering belief. This was a battle he knew how to fight. Before they could argue further, a black cat with piercing green eyes leapt gracefully onto the veranda railing. It blinked once, then spoke in the quirky, laid-back voice of Kazuki Urahara. Well now, looks like I'm interrupting something serious. My apologies, Captain Uzumaki, Kuchiki-san. A message for you from a humble candy shop owner. The cat, Yoruichi Shihoin, hopped down and trotted over, a small, sealed scroll tied to her collar. Naruto untied it, a sense of foreboding growing. Urahara didn't make social calls. He opened the scroll. The message was short. Your little trip to the human world didn't go unnoticed. The logs from the Senkaimon gate were flagged. Your friend Captain Kuchiki is raising a fuss. He's petitioning the Central 46 for a formal inquiry into your unsanctioned activities. They're listening. Be careful, Naruto. These old men don't like surprises. P.S. They especially don't like it when you're right and they're wrong. It messes with their sense of order. Naruto crushed the scroll in his fist. Of course, Byakuya. He should have expected it. What is it? Rukia asked, her eyes wide with concern. Your brother is making waves, Naruto said, his voice tight. He's using our mission to the Ashen Valley to paint me as a reckless rogue. Now he gestured to the message on the table. If we go, and he finds out, he'll have all the ammunition he needs to have me removed from command. The political trap was closing around him. If he ignored the meeting, he lost his only lead. If he went, he risked his captaincy and threw the Gote 13 into turmoil. Rukia looked from the ominous message on the table to Naruto's hard, determined face, then to the crushed scroll in his hand. The weight of her family, of her brother's rigid adherence to the law, pressed down on her. But then she remembered the feeling of the shrine, the weight of her own ghosts. And the man who had sat with her in the dark. Her choice was clear. The Grand Miyako Hotel in Karakura Town is known for its discretion, she said, her voice quiet but firm. And its RO of Top Garden offers a 360-degree view of the surrounding area. No place for an ambush to hide. She looked him directly in the eye, her resolve hardening. I can have a gigai prepared for us in 20 minutes. We go through a private channel Urahara-san maintains. There will be no record at the Senkaimon. Naruto stared at her, surprised. He had expected an argument, or at the very least, hesitation. Instead, she was offering a solution. She was choosing him, choosing the mission, over the path of least resistance. A slow, genuine smile spread across his face. You're really something else, you know that, Rukia. She just nodded, a determined fire in her violet eyes. We have a sermon to attend. Karakura Town at night was a dazzling, beautiful lie. From the rooftop garden of the Grand Miyako Hotel, the city was a sprawling galaxy of electric lights, a testament to humanity's restless energy. The air was cool, smelling of car exhaust, street food, and the faint, salty tang of the nearby ocean. It was a world away from the silent, spiritual austerity of the Seraite. Naruto, dressed in a simple pair of dark jeans and an orange jacket over a black shirt, leaned against the railing, his arms crossed. Rukia stood a few feet away, her gigai clad in a modest dark dress. She looked like a normal human girl, but her posture was tense, her senses scanning their surroundings for any hint of a threat. Relax, Naruto said, not looking at her. He'll show. People who like the sound of their own voice are never late. As if on cue, a figure emerged from the shadows near the garden's entrance. It was the cloaked figure from the shrine, its featureless white mask an unnerving void in the glittering cityscape. Naruto didn't tense. He just turned his head, offering a slight nod. You're punctual, I'll give you that. The concepts of early and late are constructs of a linear existence we seek to dissolve, the synthesized voice whispered. The figure glided towards them, its feet making no sound on the stone patio. It stopped 10 feet away, a safe distance. I am pleased you accepted my invitation, Anomaly. And you brought the sparrow. Your bond is intriguing. A deviation from the expected pattern. The figure reached up and, with a slow, deliberate movement, removed its mask. The face underneath was shockingly, disappointingly normal. He was a man who looked to be in his late 30s, with calm, intelligent gray eyes, short-cut brown hair, and a serene, almost gentle smile. He could have been a professor, or a doctor. There was nothing monstrous about him. It made his philosophy all the more terrifying. My name is Malachi, he said, his voice now a calm, pleasant baritone. No synthesizer, no effects. Just a man talking. I am a purifier of the eschaton. Eschaton. Naruto repeated the name, committing it to memory. Catchy. So, Malachi, you wanted to talk. Let's talk. What's your problem with us? Malachi's smile didn't waver. We have no problem with you, Naruto Uzumaki. We have a problem with the cage you so righteously defend. You call this world, the Soul Society, Hueco Mundo, a cycle. We call it a prison. A grand, cosmic lie perpetrated by the thing you call the Soul King. He gestured out at the glittering city below. All of this, it was once one. A silent, peaceful, unified whole. A state of perfect equilibrium. But the Soul King, in its infinite avarice, shattered that unity. It created the illusion of separation, of life and death, of spirit and matter. It created the cycle of reincarnation not as a path to renewal, but as a system to farm spiritual energy, which it hoards to maintain its own unnatural existence. Rukia flinched as if struck. This was heresy of the highest order, a direct assault on the very foundations of her world. We, Malachi continued, his voice resonating with zealous conviction, are the eschaton. We seek to correct this cosmic injustice. We seek to break down the walls of the prison, to dissolve the artificial barriers, and return all existence to the beautiful, tranquil silence of the unified state. The great silence. It is not an act of destruction. It is an act of liberation. You call erasing people liberation. Naruto's voice was dangerously quiet. I call it murder. Is it murder to awaken someone from a dream? Malachi countered, his gaze unwavering. Your bonds, your emotions, your struggles, they are fleeting phantoms in a false reality. We offer an end to suffering, an end to loneliness. We offer peace. The peace of the grave, Naruto shot back. I've heard this speech before. A world without struggle, without pain. A world where everyone is one. It's a lie. The struggle is what gives life meaning. The bonds we forge in the face of hardship are the only things that are real. The world you want is empty. Malachi's serene expression finally tightened. A flicker of frustration crossed his face. You cannot see it. You are drenched in the very energy of the prison's architect. You, Naruto Uzumaki, are the greatest blasphemy of all. A divine anomaly. You are a fragment of the Soul King's own creative power, a piece of the original life force that has somehow found its way back into the cycle. Your existence is a flaw in the system, a symptom of its decay. You are proof that the prison is breaking. He turned his calm, pitying gaze on Rukia. And you, child of the Kuchiki clan, a noble, one of the jailers, can you not feel the hollowness of your pride? Your brother enforces the laws of a parasite. He upholds an order built on a lie. You stand here, beside this crack in reality. And you call it loyalty. I call it blindness. Shut up, Rukia hissed, her hand instinctively moving towards where her Zanpakuto would be. Naruto put a hand on her arm. He's trying to get to you, Rukia. Don't let him. He looked back at Malachi, his blue eyes hard as diamonds. We're done here. Your sermon was just as boring as I thought it would be. You can have your empty world. We'll keep ours. Thanks. Malachi sighed, a sound of genuine disappointment. He put his blank white mask back on, his normal face disappearing behind the unnerving void. A shame. I had hoped beings of your power would possess the wisdom to see the truth. The harvest will continue. The prison will fall. And you, anomaly, will be the first to be purified. The synthesized voice echoed in the night air. And then, he was gone. He didn't run. He didn't use a special technique. He simply dissolved into the shadows, becoming one with the darkness. They stood in silence for a long minute, the sounds of the living world rushing back in to fill the void he'd left behind. The Soul King, a parasite, Rukia whispered, her voice trembling slightly. Everything he said, as the justification of a fanatic. Naruto finished for her, his voice firm. He turned to her, his expression serious. Don't let his words get in your head. It doesn't matter if the Soul King is a god or a turnip. What matters are the people living now. The souls in the Rukongai, the people in this town, the men and women in our division. They're real. Their lives are real. That's what we're fighting for. Everything else is just noise. His simple, powerful clarity cut through the philosophical poison Malachi had tried to inject. He had a way of boiling down the most complex issues to a single, human point. She looked at him, at his unwavering certainty, and felt her own resolve solidify once more. You're right, she said. Let's go home. We have a report to make. Their return to the Seraite was met with an immediate summons. Not to the First Division. Not to their own barracks. To the great central audience chamber. 2 stoic, high-ranking officers of the 2nd Division were waiting for them. Captain Uzumaki, by order of the Central 46, you are to come with us to answer for your conduct. Their faces were grim, their stances unyielding. Naruto sighed, running a hand through his blonde hair. Urahara's warning had come too late. Or perhaps, Byakuya had moved faster than they'd anticipated. All right, I'm coming. No need to look so grim, I'm not gonna run. He looked at Rukia, his expression softening. Go back to the 13th. Keep everyone calm. This is my mess. No, she said, her chin high. I was with you. I am your officer. I will go with you. Rukia, I'm not asking, she stated, her gaze daring him to argue. Naruto looked at her for a long moment, then a slow grin spread across his face. Fine, but if they start throwing legal jargon at us, you're the one who has to pretend to understand it. The Central 46's audience chamber was a place designed to intimidate. It was a vast, dark hall, where the accused stood in a sunken pit in the center, surrounded on all sides by towering screens. Behind the screens, the 46 magistrates were hidden, their voices the only indication of their presence. They were ancient, conservative, and the absolute author. Ity on law and justice in the Soul Society. Naruto and Rukia stood in the center, bathed in a single, harsh spotlight. The air was cold and still. A disembodied voice, old and brittle, echoed from one of the screens. Captain Naruto Uzumaki, you stand accused of gross insubordination, violation of operational protocols, and consorting with an enemy of the Seraite. How do you plead? Naruto looked up at the screens. Completely unintimidated. I plead not guilty. I was conducting an investigation, under direct orders from the head captain. Your orders were to investigate, not to conduct unsanctioned, clandestine meetings in the world of the living. Another voice snapped from a different screen. You deliberately bypassed official channels. You acted alone, endangering not only yourself but Officer Kuchiki. The enemy offered a meeting, Naruto said, his voice calm and reasonable. I took it. They gave me their name, the Eschaton. They gave me their philosophy. They want to destroy the cycle of reincarnation. They confirmed they are behind the Silent Hollows and that their plan, which they call the Harvest, is ongoing. I'd call that a pretty successful investigation, wouldn't you? A silence fell over the chamber. He had just delivered more actionable intelligence than their entire patrol network had gathered in a month. His methods were unconventional, but the results are undeniable, a new voice mused. Naruto recognized it as one of the more pragmatic members he'd been warned about. The results are irrelevant, the second voice shrieked. The law was broken, protocol was ignored. He acts like the rules do not apply to him. He is a danger to the established order. From a corner of the upper gallery, Naruto could just make out the figures of several captains who had been summoned to observe. He saw Shunsui, leaning against a pillar, a thoughtful expression on his face. He saw Toshiro Hitsugaya, looking deeply conflicted. And he saw Byakuya, his arms crossed, his face a mask of cold, triumphant fury. This was his doing. The law is a tool, Naruto said, his voice ringing with a simple, powerful truth that cut through the legalistic arguments. It's meant to help us protect people. If it gets in the way of that, then it's a bad tool. I had a choice. Follow protocol and lose our only lead, or bend a rule and get the information we needed to save lives. I made the right choice. Insolence. He mocks the very foundation of our society. The voices of the magistrates rose in an indignant chorus. My loyalty isn't to a rulebook, Naruto declared, his voice rising to match theirs. But without their shrill anger. It was filled with a deep, unshakable conviction. It's to the people of the Soul Society. And I will do whatever it takes to protect them. If you have a problem with that, then you can have my Haori. But don't you dare question my loyalty. He stood there, defiant and unapologetic, his golden ryutsu flaring unconsciously around him, a silent testament to his power and his will. He wasn't a defendant pleading for mercy. He was a leader stating his case. The chamber fell silent again, the magistrates clearly taken aback by his sheer audacity. He hadn't just defended himself, he had challenged them. Finally, the first, brittle voice spoke again, heavy with displeasure. Your record and your power grant you a leniency you do not deserve, Captain Uzumaki. However, your blatant disregard for the authority of this body cannot go unpunished. Pending a full review of this eschaton threat, you are hereby confined to the barracks of the 13th Division. You are to relinquish all command authority to your third seats and will not leave the division grounds for any reason. This session is concluded. The spotlight died, plunging them into near darkness. The hearing was over. It wasn't the verdict Byakuya had wanted, but it was a victory nonetheless. Naruto was sidelined, his influence contained. Naruto just sighed, the tension leaving his shoulders. Confined to barracks, huh? Well, I guess that means I'll have time to finally finish my paperwork. He looked at Rukia, who was staring at him with an expression of pure, unadulterated awe. Come on, let's go home. They walked back to the 13th in silence. As they reached the entrance to the captain's quarters, he turned to her. Thanks for, having my back in there. Always, Captain, she said softly. Then, with a slight change in tone, Naruto. He grinned. Get some rest, Rukia. Looks like Sentaro and Kion are in charge for a while. Try not to let them burn the place down. He slid the door to his office open and stepped inside, the door closing behind him. He was now a prisoner in his own sanctuary. He walked over to the open veranda, looking out at the division he had worked so hard to rebuild. He could feel the anxious energy of his squad members, who had surely heard the news. He sat down, leaning his back against a post, and closed his eyes, letting out a long, frustrated sigh. He was benched, right when the game was starting to get interesting. A few minutes later, he felt a familiar spiritual pressure settle just outside his door. It was quiet, steady, and resolute. Rukia. She hadn't gone to her own quarters. She had taken up a post outside his office, her back to the door, assuming a formal guard stance. It was a silent, powerful, and incredibly public act. She wasn't just standing guard over her captain. She was standing in solidarity with the man who had been condemned. She was telling her brother, the Central 46, and the entire Seraite which side she was on. Inside his office, Naruto opened his eyes. A slow smile spread across his face. He could feel her presence through the door, a steady anchor in the political storm. He wasn't alone, and for now, that was enough. Chapter 3 End. Chapter 4. The Soundless Prison. The first day of Naruto's confinement was a novelty. He dutifully tackled the mountain of paperwork he'd been avoiding, with Rukia patiently correcting his kanji through the shoji screen. The second day, he rearranged his entire office, alphabetizing his book collection and attempting, with disastrous results, to master the art of ikebana. By the third day, the novelty had worn off, replaced by a restless, caged tiger energy that vibrated through the entire 13th Division. He wasn't made for stillness. He was a creature of action, of movement, of purpose. Being confined to his barracks while a cosmic threat loomed was a unique and exquisite form of torture. His men felt it, too. The cheerful, boisterous atmosphere he had cultivated was replaced by a tense, simmering frustration. They went about their duties with grim efficiency, their anger at the Central 46's decision a palpable force. Rukia remained a constant, silent presence. She had not left her post outside his door. She took her meals there, she accepted reports there, and she slept there, sitting with her back straight against the wall, her zanpakuto across her lap. It was an act of profound, stubborn loyalty that did not go unnoticed. Her brother, Byakuya, had sent 2 formal commands for her to return to the Kuchiki manor. She had responded with 2 formal, polite refusals. The rift between the siblings was widening into a chasm. Naruto found himself talking to her through the door more and more. At first, it was about division business. Then, it became casual banter. Soon, he was telling her stories of his life in Konoha, of epic pranks and legendary ramen stands, his voice filling the quiet nights. She, in turn, would tell him about her struggles at the Shinigami Academy, her awkward attempts to navigate the labyrinthine etiquette of the noble houses, and her secret love for the ridiculous, rabbit-themed art of Chappie the Rabbit. In the strange, forced intimacy of their shared confinement, separated by a single paper wall, they were learning the small, human details of each other's lives. On the evening of the 4th day, the fragile peace was shattered. Alarms blared across the Seraite, their frantic, piercing screams a sound no one had heard since Aizen's betrayal. A red alert. Full-scale invasion. Naruto shot to his feet, his heart pounding. From his veranda, he could see them. Dozens of garganta-like tears ripping open in the sky above the Rukongai, and from them poured not hollows, but the cloaked, white-masked soldiers of the eschaton. They moved with a silent, disciplined purpose, their entropic energy signatures setting off every alarm in the Research and Development Institute. Naruto. Rukia's voice was sharp with alarm from the other side of the door. They're attacking the outer districts. Widespread, coordinated assaults. He slammed his fist against a wooden post, the wood groaning in protest. Damn it. This is what they were waiting for. They knew I'd be benched. It's a diversion. A diversion for what? Before he could answer, a shadow fell over his office. A deep, unnatural darkness that swallowed the evening light. He looked up and saw it. A new tear in reality had opened directly above the 13th Division's barracks. It was smaller than the others, but blacker, deeper. It didn't radiate energy, it absorbed it. Rukia, get back, he yelled. From the tear, a single figure dropped. It was not one of the foot soldiers. It was smaller, leaner, clad in form-fitting black material that seemed to drink the light. It wore no mask, revealing a pale, androgynous face with sharp, bird-like features and eyes that were unsettlingly blank, like polished obsidian. It landed on the roof of his office with the silence of a falling leaf. Then, the world went wrong. It wasn't an explosion. It was an implosion. A wave of conceptual force washed over the area, and with it came a profound sense of dislocation. The air grew thick and heavy, the sounds of the alarms cutting off abruptly. The familiar sight of the Seraite, visible from his veranda, wavered and dissolved like a heat haze, replaced by an endless, featureless gray mist under a sky the color of a dead star. Naruto stumbled, a wave of vertigo washing over him. He felt his connection to the Seraite, to the very reishi of soul society, stretch thin and snap. "Rukia," he yelled, sliding his door open. She was standing there, her zanpakuto drawn, her expression a mixture of shock and confusion. What happened? The alarms, everything's gone. They were no longer in the 13th Division barracks. They were in a courtyard that was a distorted, nightmarish echo of it. The buildings were the right shape, but they were made of a strange, gray, seamless material. The garden was gone, replaced by smooth, dead stone. The sky above was a uniform, oppressive gray, with no sun, no moon, no stars. The figure from the roof dropped down into the center of the courtyard, landing with that same eerie silence. It looked at them, its head tilted with cold curiosity. "Welcome, divine anomaly," it said, its voice a soft, genderless monotone. "And the little sparrow, the eschaton has prepared a special place for you. A re-education chamber, a null space, a pocket dimension," Naruto growled, stepping in front of Rukia. He flared his Ryutsu, a golden aura erupting around him, but it felt different. Muted, strained. It was like trying to shout in a vacuum. "Clever," the being said, a faint, bloodless smile touching its lips. "But your power is irrelevant here. This space is governed by our laws, not the Soul King's." Ryutsu decays. Hito unravels. "Your sun has no sky to shine in here. Here, you are simply flesh. Here, you will learn the futility of your struggle." With that, the figure's form wavered, and it dissolved into the gray mist, its final, chilling words echoing in the dead air. "Enjoy your lesson." They were alone, trapped. Rukia rushed to the edge of the courtyard, where the gate should have been. There was only a solid, seamless wall of the same gray material. She placed her hand on it. It was cold and inert. "There's no way out." Naruto was doing his own assessment, his sage-like senses, usually so attuned to the world around him, now bringing him nothing but a confusing buzz of static. He was right. My connection to the natural energy of soul society is gone. My Ryutsu, it feels like it's leaking out of me, slowly. He held up his hand and tried to form a Rasengan. The swirling sphere of chakra appeared, but it was small, unstable, and flickered like a dying candle before sputtering out. He swore under his breath. His most reliable techniques were severely hampered. "So this is their plan," Rukia said, her mind racing. The invasion was a distraction to draw the Gote 13's attention, while this, assassin, took the two of us off the board. "Smart," Naruto admitted grimly. "They can't beat me in a straight fight, so they changed the battlefield to one where I can't fight at all. Or at least, not at full strength." He looked around the dead, gray courtyard. "Well, no point in just standing here. Let's see what this lesson is all about." They began to explore their prison. It was a surreal, maddening place. It was a twisted replica of the entire 13th Division complex, but every detail was wrong. The corridors were endless, looping back on themselves. Doors opened into solid walls. The mess hall was filled with gray stone tables laden with gray stone food. It was a meticulously crafted mockery of their home. Worse, the place was not entirely empty. As they rounded a corner in one of the distorted corridors, a Pei lunged from the gray mist that perpetually clung to the floor. It was a spectral, translucent figure, vaguely humanoid, with long, claw-like fingers and a silent, screaming mouth. A guardian. Rukia reacted instantly. "Bakudo." She stopped herself, remembering the assassin's words. Hito was useless. She drew Soda no Shirayuki instead. "Zanjutsu it is." She met the creature's charge with a precise block, but the impact was jarring. The creature was physically strong, and in here, she couldn't reinforce her body with Ryutsu as she normally would. The force of the blow sent a shock up her arm. Naruto was at her side in a flash. His own blade, Koyo, in hand. He didn't use his Shikai. He fought with pure, unadorned swordsmanship. His style was less elegant than Rukia's, more brutal and instinctive, a whirlwind of powerful, decisive strikes. He drove the creature back, his blade carving glowing golden arcs in the dim gray light. Working together, they overwhelmed the Guardian. Naruto created an opening with a powerful kick, and Rukia exploited it, her blade piercing the creature's chest. It dissolved with a silent shriek, melting back into the mist. They stood back to back, breathing heavily. The fight had taken more out of them than it should have. "They're not that strong," Rukia panted. "But we're weaker. Every move costs more here. They're meant to wear us down," Naruto said, his eyes scanning the mist. "This isn't a fight to the death. It's a battle of attrition. They want to exhaust us, break our spirits." He looked at her, a grim smile on his face. "Bad news for them. I'm way too stubborn to get tired." Days bled into one another in the timeless gray twilight of the null space. There was no sun to mark the passage of time, only the slow, inexorable drain on their spiritual and physical energy. The spectral guardians attacked at random intervals, forcing them into short, draining skirmishes. They learned to conserve their strength, to end the fights as quickly and efficiently as possible. Their movements becoming a practiced, deadly dance. In the long quiet hours between attacks, they were left with nothing but each other. The last vestiges of formality between them crumbled away, burned off by the shared struggle for survival. They became simply Naruto and Rukia. They found a defensible room, a twisted version of the Kido training hall, and made it their base. During one of the lulls, Naruto sat cross-legged, his eyes closed in meditation. He was trying to find a way around the prison's rules. Rukia watched him, her own exhaustion a heavy weight on her shoulders. She was hungry, not just for food. They'd found a small, strange spring in one of the courtyards that produced a tasteless, but hydrating, clear liquid, but for real food. For warmth, for sunlight. "What are you thinking about?" she asked, her voice soft in the oppressive silence. He opened his eyes. "My old sensei, Jiraiya. He used to tell me stories about a place called Mount Myoboku, where the toads lived. It was a land overflowing with natural energy. He taught me how to feel it, how to draw it in and make it my own. That's what sage mode is. It's becoming one with the world around you." He looked around at the dead gray walls. "Here, there's nothing to become one with. The world is dead." He sighed and unsealed a small scroll he carried in his jacket. A small puff of smoke, and a plastic-wrapped cup of instant ramen appeared in his hand. It was his emergency stash. He looked at it, then at Rukia's tired face. Without a word, he unsealed a second scroll, producing another cup. "It's not much," he said, offering one to her, "and we don't have any hot water." She took it, a strange lump forming in her throat. "Thank you, Naruto." They ate the ramen dry, crunching on the hard noodles and seasoning powder. It was a miserable meal, but in the desolate emptiness of their prison, it felt like a banquet. It was a taste of the real world. A reminder of what they were fighting to get back to. They began to talk, truly talk. Stripped of their ranks, their duties, and their powers, they were just two people in a cage. Naruto told her about Kurama. He told her about the crushing loneliness of being a Jinchuriki, of being feared and hated by his own village for a power he never asked for. He described the roaring, hateful beast sealed inside him, and the long, painful journey of turning that hate into a bond, of finding a friend in the heart of his own personal demon. "Everyone saw me as a monster, or a weapon," he said, his voice a low murmur in the gray twilight. "For the longest time, I thought if I just got strong enough, if I became Hokage, they'd have to acknowledge me. But that wasn't it. It wasn't about being acknowledged. It was about acknowledging others. It was about forging bonds. One by one. That's what saves you. Not power. Not titles. The people who stand by you." Rukia listened, captivated. She had always seen him as a son, bright, powerful, and impossibly self-assured. But now she was seeing the shadows that made his light so brilliant. She was seeing the lonely little boy ostracized by his village. In turn, she found herself opening up in a way she never had before. She told him about her own lonely childhood in the Rukongai, scrounging for food with Renji and their friends. She told him about the day Byakuya had found her, about being pulled from the only life she'd ever known and thrust into the cold, gilded cage of the Kuchiki clan. Hasana, my sister, she said, her voice barely a whisper. She was Byakuya's wife. I never knew her. She made him promise to find me and adopt me as his sister. A promise he kept, even though it broke every rule of the clan. She hugged her knees to her chest. I spent 50 years trying to be worthy of that name. Trying to be the perfect noble, the perfect Shinigami. I tried to erase the girl from the Rukongai. I thought it was what he wanted. What she would have wanted. She told him about Kaien. About the easy warmth of the Shiba clan, a family that had accepted her for who she was, not who she was supposed to be. And she told him about the crushing guilt of his death, the way he had let Byakuya use it as another reason to keep her shielded, protected, and controlled. I let him build a prison around me, she admitted, the realization hitting her with the force of a physical blow. And I locked the door myself. I thought it was my duty. My penance. Naruto listened patiently, his gaze never leaving her face. When she was finished, the raw, painful confession hanging in the air between them. He didn't offer sympathy. He offered something better. Sounds to me, he said softly, like you and I have a lot in common. We both had something locked inside us we were afraid of. And we both let other people's expectations define who we were for way too long. He reached out, his hand gently covering hers. His skin was warm, real. But you're not that person anymore, Rukia. You're the officer who stood up to the Central 46. You're the warrior who outsmarted a monster that eats keto for breakfast. You're not a noble or a girl from the Rukongai. You're just you. And that's more than enough. A tear traced a path down her cheek. She didn't wipe it away. For the first time, she felt seen. Not as Kuchiki Byakuya's sister, or Kaien Shiba's student, or Captain Uzumaki's subordinate. Just as Rukia. A sudden, violent tremor shook the entire dimension, throwing them against the wall. The gray stone of the floor began to crack, and from the cracks, a blinding, corrosive white light began to pour out. What now? Rukia cried, shielding her eyes. The prison is becoming unstable, Naruto yelled over the rising roar. Or, maybe it's changing. This is the main power source. He looked around frantically, his mind racing. They couldn't stay here. The light felt wrong, corrosive. It was unmaking the very substance of the pocket dimension. The energy is flowing from a central point, he said. His eyes narrowed in concentration. It's like a river. If we can find the source, we can destroy it, she finished, her mind instantly grasping his logic. Exactly. They burst from their makeshift base, fighting their way through a fresh wave of spectral guardians that were now more aggressive, their forms flickering wildly in the corrosive light. They followed the flow of the energy, tracing the cracks in the floor back to their source. It led them back to the very first courtyard they had appeared in. In the center, where the androgynous assassin had first stood, a miniature sun of pure, chaotic, white-hot void energy now burned, pulsing violently. It was the heart of the null space, the engine that powered their prison. And it was going critical. It's going to collapse, Rukia shouted. It'll take us with it. Not if we break out first. Naruto countered. His mind was a whirlwind of desperate calculations. His own power was severely diminished. Raw force wouldn't be enough. He needed a key. A way to turn the prison's own power against it. His gaze fell on Rukia. Her keto was useless here. But her knowledge. Rukia, he yelled, grabbing her shoulders. The seal on the shrine in the Ashen Valley. The one that hid the door. She stared at him, confused. What about it? It was keyed to a specific frequency. It was a lock. This whole place is a keto construct. A bastardized version of it, but the principles have to be the same. There has to be a lock. A control matrix. Her eyes widened as she understood. A master rune. A central point in He keto formula that governs the entire structure. If we can disrupt it, we can shatter the whole thing from the inside out. He finished. Can you find it? She looked at the pulsating sphere of white-hot chaos. It was like staring into the heart of an unstable star. It would be at the center of the energy matrix. But the formula is alien. I'd have to analyze its composition in real time. How? She took a deep breath. I'd have to get close. And I'd need you to protect me while I do it. It was a terrifyingly risky plan. But it was the only one they had. All right, Naruto said, his expression hardening with resolve. I'll buy you all the time you need. He turned to face the unstable core. Just tell me what to hit. He began to draw on what little Ryutsu he had left, but it wasn't enough. He needed more. He closed his eyes, reaching for something deeper. Not the natural energy of the world, but the energy of the bond he had forged in the crucible of war. The last, lingering embers of his oldest friend. Kurama. A flicker of immense, familiar, red-orange energy flared to life within him. It was a tiny spark, but it was potent. It was pure, raw life force, a stark contrast to the deathly energy of the null space. Golden chakra, now tinged with crimson, erupted around him. It wasn't the blazing sun of his full power, but it was a fierce, defiant flame in the darkness. He created a dozen light clones. Their forms more stable now, infused with Kurama's lingering gift. Go, he commanded. The clones surged forward, throwing themselves at the unstable core. They didn't attack it. They formed a ring around it, their hands outstretched, creating a barrier of golden red energy. It was a desperate attempt to contain the chaotic pulses of white light, to buy Rukia precious seconds. The clones began to sizzle and dissolve almost immediately, the corrosive energy of the core eating away at them. Rukia, now, Naruto yelled, pouring all of his focus into maintaining the barrier. Rukia didn't hesitate. She ran forward, her eyes wide with concentration, straight towards the terrifying energy core. She stopped just outside the ring of Naruto's struggling clones, close enough to feel the skin on her face prickle and burn. She held her hands out, her fingers splayed, her mind racing. She wasn't trying to cast a spell. She was reading the energy. The alien Keto formula flowed into her senses, a chaotic symphony of discordant notes. She ignored the surface noise, the sheer, overwhelming power of it, and searched for the underlying structure, the repeating patterns, the central theme. The Master Rune. There. It was a tiny, complex knot of energy at the very heart of the sphere, the point from which all the other energy flows originated. It was the linchpin. Naruto. She screamed over the roar. It's in the center. A compressed, inverted spiral. You have to hit it with a perfectly opposing frequency. A direct, concussive burst of pure, ordered energy. Naruto's clones were failing, dissolving into nothingness. The barrier flickered. He grit his teeth, sweat pouring down his face. A perfectly opposing frequency. A burst of ordered energy. He had one shot. He dismissed the last of his clones, letting the full, unrestrained force of the unstable core wash over him. He stood his ground, the golden red aura around him the only thing keeping him from being unmade. He pulled his fist back, channeling the very last of his and Kurama's combined energy into one, single point. The Rasengan that formed in his hand was small, no bigger than his palm. But it was perfect, a flawless, stable sphere of pure, rotational power. The ultimate expression of ordered energy. He flashed forward, moving through the storm of corrosive light, his body screaming in protest. He reached the core. He could see the inverted spiral Rukia had described, a vortex of blackness at the heart of the white sun. With a final, desperate roar, he thrust his hand forward, lunging the Rasengan into the heart of the prison. For a single, silent moment, the two opposing forces met. The perfect order of the Rasengan against the perfect chaos of the null space's core. Then, the world shattered. Not with an explosion, but with the sound of a million panes of glass breaking at once. The gray sky cracked, and through the cracks, they could see the familiar deep blue of the Seraite's night. The gray stone floor dissolved into nothing, revealing the wooden planks and manicured gardens of the 13th Division barracks beneath their feet. The corrosive white light vanished, the oppressive silence was gone. They were back. Naruto collapsed to his knees, utterly drained, his body smoking from the raw power he had just contained and unleashed. Rukia rushed to his side, helping him stay upright. The alarms were still blaring, and the sounds of distant battle echoed across the Seraite. They were battered, exhausted, and spiritually depleted. But they were free, and they were together. They had walked through a personal hell, faced their own ghosts, and had come out the other side, their bond forged into something unbreakable in the silent, gray twilight of their prison. Naruto looked up at Rukia, a tired but triumphant grin on his face. Told you, I was too stubborn, to get tired. She just laughed, a sound of pure relief and joy, as the first of his conch. Earned squad members came running into the courtyard, their faces a mixture of shock and elation at the sudden reappearance of their captain. Chapter 4 End. Chapter 5. A Duel for Pride and Petals. The aftermath of their return was a whirlwind of controlled chaos. Sentaro and Kion were the first to reach them, their usual bluster replaced by sheer, unadulterated relief. Within minutes, the courtyard road was flooded with the concerned faces of the 13th Division, their collective spiritual pressure a comforting, familiar blanket after the sterile emptiness of the null space. Naruto, leaning heavily on Rukia for support, managed a weak but reassuring grin. "Did you miss me?" The squad erupted in a cheer so loud it momentarily drowned out the distant alarms. The sight of their captain, battered but alive, was a potent tonic for their frayed nerves. He was their anchor, and his return steadied the entire ship. Captain Unohana arrived moments later, her serene presence cutting through the joyful pandemonium. She took one look at Naruto's smoking, exhausted form and Rukia's drained pallor, and her gentle smile became razor-thin. "To the 4th Division, both of you, now," she commanded, her voice soft but carrying an authority that even Naruto, in his depleted state, knew better than to argue with. As members of the 4th gently but firmly escorted them away, Naruto's gaze swept over the Seraite. The sky was still scarred with the dark tears of the Eschaton's portals, and the sounds of battle, though lessening, still echoed from the outer districts. The diversion had worked. The Gote 13 had been drawn into a widespread conflict, leaving the heart of their fortress vulnerable to the assassin's surgical strike. He caught a glimpse of several figures on a distant rooftop, other captains. No doubt observing the commotion. He saw Shunsui's distinctive pink haori, a flash of Toshiro's white one, and then, a stark, unmoving silhouette that could only be one person. Rukia Kuchiki. Even from this distance, Naruto could feel the icy shock emanating from him. His plan to sideline Naruto had backfired spectacularly. He had inadvertently left his own sister vulnerable to an enemy he couldn't have predicted. The cold fury Naruto had seen in the audience chamber would be nothing compared to the storm of controlled rage and, perhaps, guilt that was surely brewing within him now. They spent the next 12 hours in the 4th Division Infirmary, subjected to Captain Unohana's terrifyingly thorough healing Kido. Naruto's reserves were almost completely dry, his chakra and Ryutsu systems strained to their absolute limit. Rukia was in a similar state of spiritual exhaustion. As Unohana worked, her gentle hands glowing with green light, she listened intently to their report. A pocket dimension designed to negate spiritual power, she mused, her eyes closed in concentration as she mended the microscopic tears in Naruto's energy pathways. An assassin who moves without sound or pressure. And a philosophy of cosmic unmaking. You have faced a truly insidious enemy, you too. We also have a name, Naruto said, his voice still hoarse. The Eschaton. And a motive, Rukia added. They believe the Soul King is a parasite and the cycle of reincarnation is a prison. They want to tear it all down and return the universe to a state of unified nothingness. Unohana's hands paused for a fraction of a second. Heresy on a scale that makes Aizen's ambitions seem quaint. The head captain must be informed immediately. She finished her work, the green glow fading. Your physical bodies are stable. Your spiritual cores, however, will need time to refill. Rest. That is an order. Despite the order, rest was impossible. The Gote 13 was in an uproar. The Eschaton's invasion had been a feint, a masterful display of guerrilla tactics. They had struck hard and fast at a dozen points along the Seraite's perimeter, engaged the responding squads in brief, intense skirmishes, and then vanished as quickly as they had appeared, retreating back into their portals. They hadn't tried to take any territory. They had simply sown chaos and tested the Gote 13's defenses. The true purpose of the attack, the abduction of Naruto and Rukia, was now terrifyingly clear. The story of their imprisonment and impossible escape spread like wildfire. The initial skepticism was washed away by the sheer, undeniable fact of their reappearance from thin air in the middle of their own barracks. Naruto's reputation, already legendary, ascended to the realm of the mythic. He hadn't just fought an enemy. He'd broken out of reality itself. His defiance of the Central 46 was no longer seen as arrogance, it was seen as prescience. He had known this enemy was different, had been willing to break the rules to understand them. And had paid the price, only to be vindicated in the most dramatic way possible. The political trap Byakuya had set for him had snapped shut, but Naruto had chewed through the bars and walked away. The one person who remained conspicuously silent through all of this was Rukia Kuchiki. On the second day after their return, Naruto was sitting on the edge of his infirmary bed, feeling the life flow back into him, when Rukia walked in. She had been discharged an hour earlier and had changed back into her Shihakusho. There was a new confidence in her posture, a quiet strength in her eyes that hadn't been there before. The null space had stripped her down to her core, and she had discovered that her core was made of steel. "The reports from the other squads are in," she said. Her voice crisp and professional, though a hint of warmth had permanently crept into it. "The Eschaton foot soldiers use the same energy nullifying field as the Silent Hollows, but on a smaller scale. They fight with those black shards we saw. They don't cut. They unmake whatever they touch. Several of our officers have injuries that Captain Unohana is struggling to heal." Naruto's brow furrowed. "So they're all armed with anti-Ryutsu weapons. This is going to be a tough fight." He looked up at her, a grin spreading across his face. "But hey, we're back. And now we know what we're up against. Time to take the fight to them." "About that," she said, her expression becoming more serious. "My brother has requested your presence in the 6th Division's primary training hall. He said he wishes to have a clarification." Naruto's grin didn't falter, but his eyes grew sharp. Clarification. Right. He knew exactly what that meant. It was a nobleman's term for a duel. Byakuya couldn't challenge him officially, not after Naruto had been so thoroughly vindicated. But he could challenge him personally, under the guise of a formal discussion. His pride had been wounded, his authority undermined, and his sister had been endangered on his watch. He needed to reassert control. He needed to put Naruto back in his place. "I'll be there," Naruto said, swinging his legs off the bed. He felt the protest from his still recovering muscles but ignored it. "Naruto, you're not fully recovered," Rukia protested, a note of genuine concern in her voice. "You can't be serious about this." "I'm serious," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "This isn't about me, Rukia. It's about you. He thinks I'm a bad influence, that I'm leading you down the wrong path. He's afraid of the change he sees in you. This isn't a fight he's picking with me. It's an argument he's having with you, and he's using me as a proxy." He stood, stretching his stiff limbs. "The only way to end that argument is to face him head-on." He looked at her, and she saw the unwavering resolve in his eyes. He wasn't doing this out of pride or anger. He was doing it for her. To settle the conflict Hat was tearing her between her family and her own burgeoning identity. The 6th Division's training hall was the polar opposite of the 13th. It was a vast, empty space of polished dark wood and stark white walls. A silent monument to martial perfection. There were no cheering squad members, no boisterous energy. There was only a cold, expectant silence. Byakuya stood in the center of the hall, his hands tucked into the sleeves of his pristine white haori. He was the very picture of aristocratic grace and lethal potential. Several other captains were present, standing along the far wall as observers: Shunsui, Jashiro Yukitaki, who looked pale but resolute, having temporarily left the 4th to witness this, and Kenpachi, a manic, bloodthirsty grin plastered on his face. This was the fight he had been waiting months to see. Rukia stood near the entrance, her heart a cold, heavy stone in her chest. Naruto walked into the hall, not in his captain's haori, but in his standard Shihakusho. He looked relaxed, his hands in his pockets, but his blue eyes were focused, missing nothing. He stopped 20 feet from Byakuya. "Captain Kuchiki," Naruto said, his tone even. "You wanted to see me, Uzumaki." Byakuya's voice was as cold and sharp as ice. "Your influence on my sister has become a detriment to her duties and a stain on the honor of our family. I will not allow it to continue. This is not a formal duel to the death. This is clarification. We will fight until one of us is unable to continue." "I see," Naruto said, his easygoing demeanor vanishing, replaced by the quiet intensity of a seasoned warrior. "And if I refuse?" "I did not offer you a choice," Byakuya stated. He raised a hand. "Scatter, Senbon Sakura." His blade dissolved into 1,000 glittering, razor-sharp cherry blossom petals, a beautiful deadly storm that filled the space between them. Kenpachi let out a guttural laugh of anticipation. Naruto didn't move, he just watched the storm approach. He didn't draw his blade. He didn't flare his Ryutsu. He simply closed his eyes. The petals swirled around him, a vortex of pink steel. They should have shredded him in an instant. But they didn't touch him. They flowed around his body as if he were a rock in a stream, parting to avoid him by a mere fraction of an inch. Byakuya's eyes widened slightly. What was this? Naruto was using his Sage Mode senses, a skill honed in a different world. He wasn't tracking each individual petal. He was feeling the flow of Byakuya's will that guided them, the currents of his Ryutsu that directed the storm. He was standing in the eye of the hurricane. The calm center where the wind did not blow. Is that all? Naruto asked, his eyes still closed. Byakuya's jaw tightened. The petals converged, forming a dozen solid blades that stabbed at Naruto from all directions. Naruto moved. It was the first time he had. He didn't dodge. He flowed. He weaved between the blades with a liquid grace that was utterly at odds with his usual explosive style. His hand shot out, and he caught the flat of one of the consolidated blades between his thumb and forefinger, stopping it dead. With a flick of his wrist, he shattered it back into 1,000 petals. The observers were stunned into silence. He was fighting Senbon Sakura's Shikai with his bare hands, and winning. You think this is about honor, don't you? Naruto said, his voice calm and clear, cutting through the whisper of the petals. He took a step forward, the storm of blades parting before him. You think I'm taking her away from you? You're wrong. He took another step. You hid her away after Kai and Shiba died. You thought you were protecting her. But you were just building a cage. A cage of guilt and duty and tradition. Another step. He was 10 feet away from Byakuya now, walking through the heart of his power. She's not a fragile doll you need to protect, Byakuya. She's one of the strongest people I've ever met. And she's finally starting to realize it. I haven't taken anything from her. I just opened the door to her cage. She's the one who chose to walk out. Byakuya's cold composure finally cracked. A flicker of rage, raw and undisguised, flashed in his eyes. You know nothing. He brought his hands together. Bankai. A forest of giant blades erupted from the ground around them, a breathtaking and terrifying display of power. Kenpachi's grin widened. This was it. Senbon Sakura Kageyoshi, vibrant display of 1,000 cherry blossoms. The giant blades dissolved. 100 million petals. An ocean of razor-sharp steel that filled the entire hall, a swirling, inescapable vortex of death. Naruto finally drew his own blade. The simple, unadorned katana seemed hopelessly outmatched against the sheer scale of Byakuya's Bankai. The ocean of petals surged towards him. Illuminate, Koyo, Naruto commanded. His blade didn't change shape. It simply erupted in a blinding column of pure, warm sunlight. The light expanded, forming a perfect, golden sphere around him. The petals slammed against the sphere, but they didn't shatter it. They sizzled, their reishi composition destabilized by the pure, life-giving energy, turning to harmless glittering dust upon impact. Naruto had created a sanctuary, a perfect defense against Byakuya's ultimate offense. But he wasn't just defending. From the golden sphere, a dozen light clones shot out. They moved through the storm of petals, their own light blades deflecting and shattering the razor-sharp fragments. They weren't trying to fight their way to Byakuya. They were spreading out, analyzing. They were mapping the currents of the petal storm, learning its patterns, its weaknesses, its ebbs and flows. Byakuya watched, his face a mask of disbelief. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. No one could withstand Senbon Sakura Kageyoshi. You either ran from it, or you were overwhelmed by it. You did not stand in the middle of it and calmly dissect it. He increased the speed of the petals, directing the entire tidal wave of his power at Naruto's golden sphere. The light flickered, but it held. Inside the sphere, the real Naruto closed his eyes again. The data from his clones was pouring into his mind. He could see the storm now, not as a chaotic mass, but as a complex, flowing system. And like any system, it had a central point. A place of perfect calm from which all the chaos was directed. The safe zone. The space immediately around Byakuya himself. Naruto's clones dissolved, their purpose served. The golden sphere around him collapsed inwards, the light flowing back in. to his blade until it was a sun-bright point of unbearable intensity. And then he was gone. He didn't flash step. He rode the currents of Byakuya's own attack, using the flow of the petals to propel himself forward at an impossible speed. He was a golden comet streaking through a pink galaxy. He appeared in an instant, directly in front of Byakuya, inside the safe zone. The ocean of petals raged harmlessly around them. Byakuya's eyes went wide with shock. He had no time to react. Naruto didn't swing his blade to kill. He moved with surgical precision. The hilt of his katana slammed into Byakuya's wrist, forcing him to drop the hiltless remnant of his own Zanpakuto. Naruto's other hand shot out, his fingers gently touching Byakuya's throat. And his own blade, Koyo, still blazing with the light of a miniature sun, was held inches from Byakuya's chest. The duel was over. The storm of 100 million petals froze, then fell to the floor, inert and harmless, like a sudden, silent snowfall. The hall was utterly quiet. Kenpachi's grin was gone, replaced by an expression of stunned awe. Shunsui pushed his hat back, a low whistle escaping his lips. Naruto stood there, his breathing even, his glowing blade a stark contrast to the darkness of Byakuya's Shihakusho. He hadn't won by overwhelming Byakuya with power. He had won by understanding him. He had dismantled his opponent's greatest weapon, not by breaking it, but by comprehending it so completely that it ceased to be a threat. He looked Byakuya in the eye, and the noble captain saw no triumph there. No arrogance, only a quiet, firm resolve. "I'm not trying to take her from you," Naruto said, his voice low and serious, meant only for the two of them. "I'm trying to make sure she has someone else who will stand by her side. Someone who will fight for her. Because she deserves it." It wasn't a threat, it was a vow, a promise of protection for the woman they both cared for. It was this, more than the defeat, that shattered Byakuya's composure. The intricate walls of pride and tradition he had built around himself cracked. He saw in Naruto's eyes not a rival, but a reflection of his own failure. He had tried to protect Rukia by caging her. Naruto was protecting her by helping her find the strength to fly. Byakuya didn't speak. He didn't need to. He simply closed his eyes, a silent, profound admission of defeat. It wasn't just the duel he had lost. It was the argument. Naruto deactivated his Shikai, the blinding light receding, leaving them in the quiet, dim hall. He lowered his hands and took a step back, giving the defeated captain his space. He turned and walked away, his gaze finding Rukia. She was standing by the door, tears streaming silently down her face. They were tears of shock, of relief, of 1,000 conflicting emotions. He gave her a small, tired smile. He had fought for her. And he had won. As he walked past the other captains, Kenpachi finally broke the silence. He wasn't grinning. He was looking at Naruto with a new, terrifying level of respect. "You," Kenpachi said, his voice a low growl. "Me, next. A real fight." Naruto just chuckled, not breaking his stride. "Get in line, Kenpachi. Looks like I've got a bigger war to worry about." He walked out of the 6th Division's training hall, leaving behind a defeated captain, a stunned audience, and a fundamental shift in the political and personal landscape of the Gote 13. The sun of the 13th court had just proven that it could outshine even the proudest, most beautiful storm. Chapter 5 End. Chapter 6. The Harvest of Silence. The aftermath of the duel settled over the Seraite like a low-hanging fog. Rukia Kuchiki had secluded himself within his family manor, his silence a more potent admission of his defeat than any public declaration. The balance of power among the captains had subtly but irrevocably shifted. Naruto was no longer the disruptive newcomer, he was a force to be reckoned with, a leader whose strategy, acumen and unconventional power had been proven beyond any doubt. The quiet respect he'd earned from pragmatists like Shunsui and Yukitake had solidified into genuine alliance. Even Kenpachi's bloodlust now held a new, almost reverent edge, but Naruto felt no triumph. The victory had been a necessity, a painful severing of a knot that was choking Rukia's growth. Now, the true enemy remained. The eschaton. He stood with Rukia on the roof of the 1st Division's central spire, looking out over the Rukongai. They were there at the head captain's request, part of a newly formed rapid response council that included Shunsui, Unohana, and a begrudging Mayuri. The days of fractured command were over. Yamamoto, shaken by the precision of the Eschaton's attack, had consolidated his authority. "They've been quiet since the feint," Rukia observed, her gaze sweeping the endless sprawl of districts below. "Too quiet. It's been a week." "They're not quiet," Naruto corrected, his eyes narrowed. "They're working. They got what they wanted from their last attack. A measure of our strength, our response times, and they took me off the board for a few days. They're analyzing, planning their next move." He pointed to the north. "And whatever it is, it's going to be big." As if his words were a prophecy, it began. It wasn't a garganta, not a violent tear in the sky. It was subtler, more sinister. In the sky above District 57, a working-class region known as the Anvil, for its many forges and craftsmen, the air began to shimmer. The shimmer solidified, coalescing into a massive, intricate ring of the same black, light-absorbing material as the Eschaton's weapons. It was easily a mile in diameter, a black halo hanging over the unsuspecting district. Alarms screamed to life across the Seraite. "Mayuri, what is that thing?" Naruto barked into the communication Kido device clipped to his collar. Mayuri's voice, filtered through the device, was a mixture of scientific glee and genuine alarm. "It's a colossal energy siphon. A harvester. It's generating a massive nullification field, but instead of projecting it downwards, it's drawing energy upwards. It's magnificent. It's getting the souls of the inhabitants directly." On the ground in District 57, chaos erupted. The people, men, women, children, suddenly cried out, clutching their chests. Faint, shimmering outlines of higher spiritual forms were being forcibly pulled from their physical bodies, drawn upwards in ethereal streams towards the ravenous black ring in the sky. It wasn't killing them with violence, it was harvesting them like wheat. A second ring began to form over the adjacent District 58. And a third over District 56. "They're targeting an entire sector," Shunsui said, his usual lazy demeanor gone, laced by the grim focus of a commander at war. "This is it. The harvest. All captains, deploy." Yamamoto's voice boomed over the communion network, crackling with ancient fury. "Priority 1 is the destruction of those harvesters. Priority 2 is the evacuation of civilians. Do not let them complete this atrocity." Naruto didn't wait for further orders. "Rukia, with me." They leapt from the roof, two blurs of black and white. "Sentaro, Kion." Naruto's voice was a thunderclap over his division's private channel. "The entire 13th, deploy to District 57. Form a perimeter, get the civilians out of the harvester's range. Go, now." He and Rukia outpaced the other captains, their shared shunpo a desperate, synchronized race against time. They arrived at the edge of the affected zone first, and the scene was a vision of hell. Thousands of souls were being drawn into the sky, their faint cries of terror and confusion a silent, heart-rending chorus. On the ground, their physical bodies were collapsing, left behind like empty shells. From the base of the harvester, 3 massive pillars of the same black material descended, slamming into the ground and anchoring the colossal ring. Around the base of these pillars, dozens of Eschaton foot soldiers stood guard, their featureless white masks turning in unison towards the arriving Shinigami. And standing before them, at the very epicenter of the harvest, was a new figure. She was tall and regal, clad not in a cloak but in interlocking plates of a material that looked like polished obsidian. Her hair was a cascade of pure white, and her face was one of serene, chilling beauty, marred only by eyes that held the cold, empty expanse of a starless void. This was not a zealot like Malachi or an assassin like the one from the null space. This was a general. This was royalty. The anomaly, the woman said, her voice a low, melodic hum that was somehow more terrifying than a shout. "You have come to witness our grand work. I am Ligeia, first daughter of the Eschaton. And this is the day we begin to unmake your world." Naruto didn't waste time on words. His Ryutsu exploded outwards, a golden nova of defiance. "Rukia, the pillars. They're the anchors. If we can destroy them, we might be able to destabilize the ring. I'll handle the welcoming committee." "Understood," she replied, already moving, her hand on the hilt of her blade. Naruto drew Koyo. "Illuminate." Quote. His blade blazed to life, and its light was more than just an attack. It was a statement. A declaration of life in the face of erasure. The golden light washed over the area, and for a moment, the ethereal streams of souls being pulled upwards seemed to slow, their ascent momentarily arrested by the pure, vital energy. It was a beacon of hope in the encroaching darkness. The Eschaton soldiers charged, their black shards held ready. Naruto met them head-on, a whirlwind of golden light and righteous fury. He didn't need his clones. He was a one-man army, his blade a blur, his movements a symphony of controlled power. He wasn't just fighting them. He was protecting the collapsing civilians behind him, his Ryutsu forming a tangible barrier that shielded them from the fight. He parried a blow from a black shard, the entropic weapon hissing as it made contact with his blade of pure light. He didn't overpower the soldier. He used the soldier's own momentum, spinning and using a Hakuda kick to shatter its knee before his blade cleaved through its neck. He moved with a brutal, efficient grace, a commander on the front lines, leading from the very tip of the spear. Other captains began to arrive, their own squads in tow. The battle for the districts erupted into a full-scale war. Hitsugaya's ice dragons clashed with squads of Eschaton soldiers. Is freezing attacks a potent counter to their entropic shards. Soi Fan and her stealth force became blurs of death, striking from the shadows, while Kenpachi and the 11th Division charged into the thickest part of the fighting with joyous, bloodthirsty roars. The sky became a canvas of warring powers. The stark black of the Eschaton's technology against the vibrant, chaotic energies of the Gote 13's Shikai and Bankai releases. Rukia, meanwhile, had reached the base of the nearest pillar. It was immense, a monolith of dead, black material that hummed with a low, bone-jarring frequency. It radiated a powerful nullification field, stronger than anything she had faced before. Some no mai, Tsukishiro. She incanted, freezing the ground around the pillar's base. She hoped to destabilize it, but the ice simply cracked and sublimated against the pillar's immense energy. Brute force was useless. She fell back on the lesson she'd learned in the null space. She didn't attack the pillar, she studied it. She let her senses analyze the flow of energy, searching for a weakness, a flaw in its design. She saw it. The energy wasn't uniform. It was flowing upwards, from deep within the ground, into the pillar, and up to the ring. The pillar was a conduit. She looked over at the battle raging around Naruto. He was a sun in the midst of a storm, his golden Haori a rallying banner for the other squads. He wasn't just fighting, he was commanding. His voice, clear and strong, cut through the din of battle, directing squads, pointing out weak points, coordinating attacks. He was using his senses to perceive the entire battlefield at once, acting as a field commander for the whole operation. He was the heart of their defense. Inspired by his leadership, Rukia found her focus. She couldn't destroy the pillar, but maybe she could disrupt the flow. She plunged her pure white blade into the earth a few feet from the pillar's base. Bankai. The world held its breath. It was a word no one, not even Naruto, had ever heard her speak. Haka no Tagame, censure of the white haze. There was no explosion of power, no grand transformation. Instead, a wave of absolute, profound cold washed out from her blade. It wasn't the aggressive, expansive cold of Hitsugaya's Bankai. It was a quiet, creeping, absolute zero. The ground around her froze solid, not with ice, but with the cessation of all energy, all movement. The air itself seemed to crystallize, a beautiful, deadly mist of pure white blanketing the area. The energy flowing from the ground into the pillar stuttered. The absolute, E0 of her Bankai was freezing the very reishi of the earth, creating a state of stasis that choked off the harvester's power source. The massive black ring in the sky flickered. The streams of souls being pulled upwards weakened. It was working. Naruto, sensing the shift in the battlefield, glanced over and saw her, a goddess of pure white frost standing in the heart of a frozen, silent world. A fierce, proud grin flashed across his face before he turned his attention back to the enemy. Ligeia, the Eschaton general, had been observing the battle with a detached, serene calm. But when her harvester flickered, a frown finally touched her perfect lips. She looked at Rukia, a flicker of genuine surprise in her void-like eyes. Then, she looked at Naruto, who was systematically dismantling her elite guard. "This changes things," she murmured. She began to move, gliding through the battlefield like a phantom. Her target wasn't Rukia, it was Naruto. Naruto felt her approach, a moving zone of absolute cold in the fiery chaos of the battle. He dispatched the last soldier in his path and turned to face her, his blade held ready. "You are impressive, Anomaly," Ligeia said, her voice a melodic hum. "You inspire them. Your light gives them a false hope. I must extinguish it personally." She held out her hand, and a long, elegant sword of the same polished obsidian as her armor materialized from thin air. The battle around them seemed to fade away as the two powerhouses faced each other. Ligeia attacked. She was impossibly fast, her movements fluid and deadly. Her blade didn't aim to cut, it aimed to touch. Every time her obsidian sword came near, Naruto could feel his own vital energy being leached away, the light of his Shikai dimming. Their duel was a clash of fundamental opposites. Naruto's every move was an explosion of life and energy, his golden blade leaving trails of warmth and light. Ligeia's every strike was a whisper of entropy and decay, her black sword draining the very air of its heat. He was creation, she was unmaking. He couldn't land a solid blow. She was too fast, her style too precise. She was forcing him onto the defensive, slowly, methodically draining him. He realized with a jolt that she wasn't trying to kill him quickly. She was enjoying this. She was savoring the act of unmaking a being of such potent life. Meanwhile, Rukia was straining. Hack. A no to game was a bankai of terrifying power, but it came at a great cost. It was a power that could kill its wielder. If she held it for too long, she herself would become a statue of ice. The frost was already creeping up her arms, her skin turning a deathly pale white. She had to end this. She looked at the other two pillars. Other captains, seeing her success, were focusing their attacks on the conduits. Hitsugaya and Byakuya, who had finally emerged from his seclusion, his face a grim mask of duty, were combining their powers, encasing the second pillar in a massive tomb of ice and a prison of a million petals. The second ring began to flicker and die. "Just one more, Renji." Rukia's voice, strained and thin, crackled over her private communication link to her oldest friend, who was fighting nearby. The third pillar. Now, Renji Aburai, having just defeated a squad of Eschaton soldiers with his own bankai, Hahio Zabumaru, didn't hesitate. He directed his massive, skeletal serpent to attack the base of the final pillar. Zabumaru's powerful jaws clamped down, but its fangs couldn't find purchase on the smooth, entropic material. "It's no good, Rukia," he yelled back. "Don't attack it. Attack the ground under it." Hakatsu Teiho. Renji understood immediately. He charged a blast of pure red ryutsu in his bankai's mouth and fired it not at the pillar, but at the earth beneath it. The ground exploded, creating a massive crater and severing the pillar's connection to its subterranean power source. The third ring sputtered and died. With all three harvesters destabilized, the entire system collapsed. The black rings in the sky shattered like glass, dissolving into nothingness. The souls that had been drawn upwards, now freed, drifted back down, gently re-entering their waiting bodies. A collective gasp went through the district as thousands of people awoke, confused and terrified, but alive. They had won. But the battle wasn't over. Ligeia, seeing her grand work undone, finally lost her serene composure. A look of pure, cold fury twisted her beautiful features. Insolent gnats, she disengaged from Naruto, her form blurring. In an instant, she was standing before Rukia, her obsidian blade raised to strike down the one who had first defied her. Rukia, still frozen in the final moments of her bankai release, was completely defenseless. "Rukia." Naruto's roar was one of pure terror. He moved faster than he had ever moved before. He didn't use shunpo. He poured every last ounce of his remaining energy, every spark of Kurama's gift, into a single, desperate burst of explosive speed. The world turned into a blur of gold. He appeared between Ligeia and Rukia an instant before the obsidian blade could fall. He didn't have time to block. He didn't have time to dodge. He took the blow. The black, entropic blade plunged deep into his shoulder, just beside his neck. There was no blood, no sound of tearing flesh. There was only a sickening, silent hiss as his very being began to unmake. The golden light of his ryutsu was devoured, his flesh turning a dull, lifeless gray around the wound. The entropic poison spread rapidly, black veins of nothingness spider webbing out from the point of impact. Ligeia's eyes widened in triumph. Yes, Be unmade, false son. Naruto grit his teeth, a guttural snarl ripping from his throat. The pain was unlike anything he had ever felt. It wasn't physical, it was a conceptual agony, the feeling of his own existence being erased. But as the gray decay spread towards his heart, it met something. A seal, an ancient, complex eel spiraling out from the center of his being. The seal that had once held a godlike demon. The seal that was now the very core of his soul. And from that seal, a wave of primal, indomitable life force erupted. It was the legacy of his mother, the Uzumaki clan's sheer, stubborn vitality, amplified 1,000 times over by the divine chakra of the Sage of Six Paths. The black, entropic veins halted. Then, they were pushed back, consumed by a tide of pure, golden life. The gray, dead flesh regained its color. The wound, the point of unmaking, was forcibly remade. Healed, Naruto grabbed Ligea's sword arm with his free hand. His grip like of ice. He looked her in the eye, his own blue eyes blazing with a divine, terrifying light. My turn, he growled. He channeled his life force through his hand, directly into her. It wasn't an attack, it was a transfusion. He flooded her with the very concept she despised. Pure, chaotic, vibrant life. Ligeia screamed. It was not a sound of pain, but of overload. Her body, a vessel of pure entropy, could not handle the influx. Cracks of golden light spread across her obsidian armor, across her pale skin. She was a creature of the void being force-fed a sun. With a final, desperate shriek, she exploded in a shower of black and gold light. Naruto stood there, panting, the last of his energy spent. He swayed on his feet, the cost of his victory finally crashing down on him. The district was devastated, thousands of souls were traumatized, and he had been pushed to the very brink of erasure. The Gote 13 had won the battle, but the scale of the Eschaton's power, the horror of their goal, and the personal cost of the fight left no room for celebration. Rukia, finally released from her Bankai as its energy dissipated, stumbled forward, catching him as he fell. Naruto, she cried, her voice filled with panic. He looked up at her, a weak, tired grin on his face. See, told you, I'd stand by your side. He lost consciousness, his head slumping against her shoulder. The weight of the hero finally becoming too much to bear. Chapter 6 End. Chapter 7. Lieutenant of the Sun. The stillness of the 4th Division was a stark contrast to the lingering chaos of the Gote 13. In the week following the Battle of the Anvil, the Seraite was a hive of activity. Wounded were tended to, defenses were rebuilt, and a palpable sense of dread hung in the air. The Eschaton had proven they could strike wherever and whenever they pleased, and their methods were unlike anything the Shinigami had ever faced. The victory had been a costly one, and the cost was most visible here, in the quiet, sterile halls of the infirmary. Naruto lay in a private room, a place reserved for captains in critical condition. He had been unconscious for 3 days, his body and soul locked in a desperate battle to recover from Ligea's entropic wound. Unohana had done all she could, the rest was up to the monstrous vitality that was the core of his very being. Rukia had not left his side. She sat in a simple wooden chair beside his bed, a silent, sleepless sentinel. She had been cleared by Unohana, her own spiritual reserves slowly, painfully refilling after the strain of her first Bankai. But she couldn't rest, not while he lay so still. She watched the steady, slow rise and fall of his chest, the only sign of the ferocious battle for life happening within him. She remembered the terror of seeing Ligea's blade plunge into his shoulder. The horrifying spread of the gray decay. And then, his impossible defiance, the eruption of pure life that had not only saved him but had turned his enemy's nature against them. He hadn't just defeated Ligeia, he had annihilated her on a conceptual level. Her brother had visited once. Byakuya had stood in the doorway, his face an unreadable mask. He had looked at the unconscious Naruto, then at her, his gaze lingering on the stubborn set of her jaw. He hadn't spoken a word. He had simply turned and left. It wasn't an apology, but it was an acknowledgement. A concession. The argument between them was over. On the 4th day, Naruto's fingers twitched. Rukia was instantly on her feet, her heart leaping into her throat. Naruto. His eyes fluttered open, the brilliant cerulean blue hazy with confusion before slowly coming into focus. He looked at her, a slow, lazy smile spreading across his face. Hey, he rasped, his voice rough from disuse. Did I miss ramen night? Tears of pure, unadulterated relief welled in Rukia's eyes. She didn't even try to stop them. She just laughed, a choked, watery sound. You idiot. Over the next few days, as he recovered with a speed that left even Unohana speechless, the room became the unofficial command center for the eschaton crisis. Shunsui and Yukitake were frequent visitors. Their discussions with Naruto filled with a new level of respect and collaboration. They spoke not as a senior captain to a junior, but as equals, as fellow commanders planning a war. Rukia was always there. She acted as his aide, taking notes, fetching reports, and providing her own sharp, insightful analysis. She had become his right hand, his most trusted confidant. The entire Gote 13 saw it. The partnership that had been forged in the null space and tempered in the harvest was now an undeniable fact. It was during one of these meetings that Naruto, sitting up in bed and looking more like his old self, made his move. Shunsui was detailing the political fallout. The Central 46 were in a panic, their rigid laws proving utterly useless against a conceptual threat. They're terrified, Shunsui said, taking a sip from his ever-present flask. They're looking to the head captain for answers, and he's looking to us. What we need now, more than ever, is strong, decisive leadership within the divisions. Naruto nodded thoughtfully. I agree. He looked directly at Shunsui, then at Yukitake, his expression serious. The 13th has been without a formal lieutenant for too long. Sentaro and Kion are excellent third seats, but they're not strategists. The division needs a true second in command. Especially now. He paused, his gaze shifting to Rukia, who had been quietly taking notes in the corner. I'm officially recommending Rukia Kuchiki for the position of lieutenant of the 13th Division. The room fell silent. Shunsui raised an eyebrow, a slow, knowing smile spreading across his face. Yukitake looked from Naruto to Rukia, his gentle face breaking into a warm, proud grin. He had always seen the potential in her, the strength beneath the layers of guilt and duty. Rukia herself was frozen, the brush in her hand hovering over the paper. Lieutenant. The thought was a dizzying, terrifying, exhilarating shock. It was a position she had never, in her wildest dreams, thought she would hold. It was the position Kaien Shiba had held. She's proven herself 10 times over, Naruto continued, his voice ringing with unshakable conviction. She has one of the sharpest analytical minds in the Seraite. She unlocked her Bankai under the most extreme pressure imaginable and used it to turn the tide of a battle that was all but lost. Her courage is beyond question. She is the best person for the job. Period. Shunsui looked at Rukia, at her stunned face, then back at Naruto's fierce, proud expression. Well, he drawled, it's highly irregular to promote a non-seated officer directly to lieutenant, but these are highly irregular times. He clapped his hands together. I'll back the nomination. Jashiro. With all my heart, Yukitake said, his voice filled with genuine warmth. It's long past time. With the backing of 2 of the most respected senior captains, the promotion was all but guaranteed. The Central 46, desperate for any sign of stability and strength, would approve it without question. Later that day, after the captains had left, Naruto found Rukia on the rooftop garden of the 4th Division, staring out at the setting sun. He had been quiet ever since his announcement, a maelstrom of emotions clearly warring within her. He walked over and stood beside her, leaning against the railing. For a long time, they just watched the sky bleed from orange to purple. The comfortable silence, a language they both understood. Lieutenant Kuchiki, he said softly, testing the title. Has a nice ring to it. She didn't look at him. Why, Naruto? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. Why me? I already told you, you're the best person for the job. No, she said, finally turning to face him, her violet eyes shining with unshed tears. There are other officers, more experienced, more conventional. This will cause an uproar in my clan. The elders are already furious with me for defying Byakuya, for standing with you. This will be seen as the final betrayal. A final rejection of the Kuchiki name. Is that what you're doing? He asked gently, rejecting their name. No, I don't know, she confessed, her voice breaking. I feel like I'm being torn in two. The duty I owe my family, the debt I owe my sister, and this. The person I'm becoming when I'm with you. I'm afraid. He listened, his expression soft. He didn't dismiss her fears. He didn't tell her what to do. He just listened until she had laid all her conflicted feelings bare. When I was a kid, he began, his voice a low, steady anchor in her emotional storm, I had this dream. I was going to become Hokage, the leader of my village. And I thought, if I just got that title, that hat, everyone would have to respect me. They'd have to see me for who I was. He looked out at the fading light. But I was wrong. The hat doesn't make the man. The title doesn't make you a leader. It's the other way around. It's your actions, the bonds you forge, the people who believe in you, that's what gives the title meaning. The title is just a recognition of who you already are. He turned to her, his blue eyes holding hers, filled with a profound, unwavering belief that stole her breath away. I'm not making you lieutenant because I want to change you, Rukia. I'm doing it because I see who you are. You're a leader. You're a hero. You're the woman WHO walked into the heart of a storm and froze it solid to save thousands of lives. The title, it's just the rest of the world catching up to what I already know. His words struck her to the very core, silencing the warring voices in her head. He wasn't giving her a burden. He was giving her a mirror, showing her the strength she hadn't been able to see in herself. I don't care about the Kuchiki elders, he said, his voice dropping. Becoming more personal, more intense. I don't care about what anyone else thinks. All I care about is you. Your strength, your stubbornness, your heart, I've come to rely on it. I rely on you. The confession hung in the air between them, simple, honest, and more powerful than any declaration of love. He was the sun, a being of immense power who inspired armies. And he was admitting that he relied on her, the quiet, once unseated officer who was afraid of her own shadow. The last of her defenses crumbled. The fear, the doubt, the weight of her family's expectations, they all fell away. Leaving only the simple, undeniable truth of what she felt for the man standing in front of her. The space between them seemed to vanish. He leaned in, his movements slow, deliberate, giving her every chance to pull away. She didn't. She met him halfway. His lips met hers. It wasn't a kiss of sudden, explosive passion. It was a kiss of quiet confirmation. It was warm, gentle, and deeply reassuring. It was the feeling of finding a safe harbor in the middle of a raging sea. It tasted of sunlight and ozone and the faint, lingering scent of medicinal herbs from the infirmary. It was a promise, an anchor, a beginning. When they broke apart, the last sliver of the sun had dipped below the horizon, plunging the world into the soft embrace of twilight. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. Everything that needed to be said had been said in that one, perfect moment. The news of her promotion was made official the next day. As Rukia had predicted, it sent shockwaves through the noble houses. The Kuchiki clan elders were apoplectic. But the reaction from the Gote 13 at large was overwhelmingly positive. The soldiers on the ground had seen her in the harvest. They had seen her stand beside Naruto. Had witnessed the power of her Bankai. They respected her. She had earned it. Her first act as lieutenant was to walk with Naruto back into the 13th Division barracks. He had been officially discharged, and the entire squad was assembled in the main courtyard to welcome them. Sentaro and Kion stood at the front, their faces beaming with pride. Captain Uzumaki, Lieutenant Kuchiki, Sentaro boomed, his voice echoing across the courtyard. The entire division bowed as one. Naruto grinned, clapping Sentaro on the shoulder. All right, at ease. He turned to the assembled squad, his voice ringing with renewed energy. We've been through a lot. We've faced an enemy we don't understand, and we've taken losses. But we're still here, and we're stronger than we were before. He gestured to Rukia, who stood beside him, her posture straight and confident. You all know Lieutenant Kuchiki. She has stood on the front lines with us, she has bled with us. And her strength and wisdom saved us all. There is no one I trust more to stand by my side. She is your lieutenant. You will give her the same respect and loyalty you give me. A roar of approval went up from the squad. They had already accepted her. The promotion was just a formality. Rukia looked out at the sea of faces, her comrades, her family, and then at the man beside her. The man who had seen her, truly seen her, and had given her the strength to see herself. The fear was gone, replaced by a quiet, fierce determination. Later that night, long after the welcome back celebrations had died down, they stood on the roof of the captain's quarters, the same place they had once communicated through a paper door. The air was cool, the sky clear. "Ready for this?" Naruto asked, looking at her. "Ready for what?" she replied. "The paperwork. The angry letters from my clan elders. The next inevitable doomsday attack. All of the above," he laughed. She smiled, a genuine, radiant smile that reached her eyes. "As long as I'm standing next to you, I'm ready for anything." He reached out and took her hand, his fingers lacing through hers. It felt natural, it felt right. They stood there for a long time, hand in hand. A captain and his lieutenant, two lonely souls who had found their anchor in each other. The war with the eschaton was far from over, and the darkness was gathering on the horizon. But for the first time, they would face it together, under a dawn of their own making. Chapter 7 End.